I'm part of the United States Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, and I have been for several years now. In my tenure, I've deployed multiple times to Afghanistan, Iraq, and a few months in Syria, several African countries. I've been to all four corners of the globe, and I've seen my fair share of the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes with being a part of SOCOM. I've got plenty of stories, some more interesting than others, but almost all of them are heavily classified behind red tape that will never be declassified until I'm dead and gone. However, there was an incident a few nights ago that stuck out from all the others, mostly because one, unlike all of the other operations that took us to a combat zone across the distant hemisphere, this one happened right at home in our own backyard. And the enemies weren't a foreign proxy, a group of insurgents. It wasn't even human. Stuff from that night is still weird, and it's not like Command is going to give us any answers. It's the reason that I'm bypassing everything that I've been told, disregarding and putting my butt on the line even if I use false information and withhold names. Plenty of innocent people have died, as you'll find out. And upper command would sooner bury it than acknowledge their deaths and give their families closure. I don't have all the answers of what happened in that Western Tennessee National Park, but I do have enough to let people know the truth. The semi-truth anyways. For safety and privacy purposes, like I stated previous, I'm withholding a lot of personal information such as names, exact locations, and unit information, referring to smaller stuff that I don't think even the scary 3-letter groups could really trace. Even if they cared, I hope they don't. Like I said, I'm part of a SOCOM, a Green Beret A-team. You all know who the Green Berets are. You should. My team is nicknamed Raider, a general theme in our company, naming things after warrior culture. Raider, Artemis, Barbarian, Centurion, etc. It's a 10-man element. The team lead, a way too salty Georgian captain with a warrant officer, a medic, a comms sergeant, and 6 weapons sergeants. Our captain decided this way was best. Considering we're all in one piece after our last mission, he was right. Our weekend was calm and boring as we got rotated on QRF, Quick Reaction Force for the month. And QRF means that if someone somewhere needs the green-eyed boogeyman of the Western world, we were ready to kit up and be there at a moment's notice. It just so happened right when some of us were getting ready to head to the bar and have our 2 singular authorized beers of QRF a month, we were called in. When we raced back to our COP and got our stuff ready, the captain came with some surprising information. We'd be able to probably make it back for those beers because we were heading to West Tennessee, of all places. We didn't know what the status was yet. Command didn't give us any information. What the OPFOR was, what weapons they had, what the layout of the area was. Nothing. But being the QRF team, Raiders still kitted up and we were at the HLZ in less than 20. While we waited for our transport, the captain finally got some information. Apparently, a facility in the middle of uninhabited, restricted woods of a national park had activated a distress signal. The woods it was situated in was a large national park in, like I said, Western Tennessee, with a long history of disappearances on its now frequently closed and blocked off trails and campsites. This raised a few questions. What was the facility? Why was it in a national park? What happened to need to roll out the angriest Green Beret team this side of the East Coast to act as its backup? Why were we going there when, in an hour, somebody in Libya or somewhere across Eurasia might need us to back them up? The captain acknowledged all of these questions but assured us that that was all he knew. He's been with our team for years now, several deployments to the box and back, and he's always been straight with us. It's how we knew that he was lying. Our transport finally arrived, 160th SOAR, Night Stalkers, an aviation unit that's been around for nearly 40 years, having dragged every single kind of SOCOM unit to every single part of the world. We expected the Black Hawk they brought, but the armed escort of 2 birds that came with them was a surprise. I mean, we were in domestic America, we were going to Tennessee, why were they here? Even with the Night Stalkers flying at top speeds across several states, it still took us a couple of hours to reach our landing point. The inside of that bird going full throttle was deafening. Even with the electronic headsets that we were sporting, it was ear-splitting. And yet, while sitting next to the captain, I could tell that he was speaking to someone on a different frequency. This was off because normally he would go to the comm sergeant and have to use the radio, but he had a side channel filled in his radio talking to someone, writing down incoming information. I was able to peek over and saw some of the things that he was writing. Mass Cal, close quarters Op 4, no blue 4 for X. The birds touched down in the middle of an empty parking lot outside of the local ranger station. We filed out into the open area, the birds took off, and the captain chimed in on our team network.
Raider Romero, this is Raider Lead. Get on the net and have them hold orbit in case we need close air. Break.
He then broke transmission and talked to us. All raiders hold outside and take up security.
I'm gonna get the Ragnar. Prepare for a hasty ramp brief. I just got more information.
We all took positions behind some of the parked vehicles the Rangers would use. And just to clear things up, our team was outfitted with GPNVG, also known as quad nods, 4-barreled night vision optics that provide an almost daytime-like view of our surroundings. Couple that with our PECs mounted on our rifles, allowing us to see and shoot anything at night. As the military says, we own the night. The tree line in front of us was lit up like an operator rave party as the captain walked back, nods on as the ranger currently on shift followed him. He keyed into our net and we could hear him through our headsets.
All raiders, this is Lead. New information states that the facility has suffered a mass cal. Break.
Mass cal means mass casualties.
Enemy Op 4 unidentified, however outgoing net during distress call indicates that Op 4 is extremely dangerous and engaged at close range. Break. There is no Blue 4 on site, I repeat. Main has stated there is no Blue 4 on site, and we are to drop any and all packs that we see.
A few seconds passed as the captain looked back to the park ranger. Many additional comments, Ranger Clements. The man was maybe in his mid-40s, balding. He scratched the back of his neck, clearing his throat before speaking. I heard a lot of gunfire coming from down there. And don't split up whatever you do in these woods. Don't split up. Our medic laughed. Well, ain't that comforting? The captain nodded to the man as he headed back in. Everyone wants your 6s, 12s, and 5s. Let's go. We picked up and moved out. Everybody had their kind of final moments, a type of readiness drill that they did before they stepped onto the path into the woods. Same stuff that we did before stepping out of the FOBs and compounds back east. I let out one final breath of hot air in the cold. Our medic slapped the side of his helmet, hyping himself up. The captain pulled out and kissed a small crucifix necklace from underneath his combat shirt. We headed down the pathway, following the captain in a staggered column. Our IR lasers scanned the trees, rocks, and foliage around us, looking desperately for any hostiles that lurked in the darkness. Though to our paranoid readiness, nothing appeared, but something was definitely following us. When we move through forest environments, you listen to the animals around you, the crickets, the birds, the movement of animals and what direction they're heading and how fast. Moving down that path, though, we couldn't hear a thing. It's common when you're a group of heavily armed green men moving through a forest at night that some of the squirrels and birds will run the hell away, but not the crickets or the bird songs in the distance. There's a certain level of ambience that animals will maintain even if they detect humans around. There was none of that, nothing. Not a cricket, a bird, a cicada, nothing. Silent professionals, it's in our name. So when I could hear the guy 10 meters ahead of me breathing as we moved through that dead forest, it told me that something else was here in these woods with us. A predator, and that the forest was more afraid of it than us. After a long stretch of marching down the trail, the captain held a hand up signaling a halt. As I got down to my part of the column, the middle section, he called over a radio.
"This is lead. On me, time now."
We quickly rushed up to what we saw was a metal chain-link fence. 4 of our weapons sergeants and the medic took up security covering the woodline behind us as I and the other remaining one went up to the gate with the captain. The park's trail carried on for a few more meters before stopping dead into some trees. The dirt path broke off and formed a gravel one that led into a sectioned off area behind a chain-linked fence and gate. A no trespassers sign hung high, and just beyond the gate we could see a small guard shack. The captain tried to signal whoever might be in there by switching on the surefire tack light on his rifle, shining it and lasso waving it all over the booth. However, upon stopping and centering on a doorway, we saw a large amount of blood splashed on the back wall and pooled over the floor, an arm laying halfway out of the doorframe. The captain looked to the other weapons sergeant with us. "Get your kit," he nodded, slinging his rifle as he dropped his assault pack, digging out a small pair of bolt cutters. Each of our weapons sergeants carried a different loadout depending on what we needed. One could be a gunner, another is a grenadier. Can't name him, but Breach Man, as I guess I'll call him, always carried a breach kit just in case. He walked over to the lock, but just as he got the blades of the cutter around the lock, we heard it. It sounded like it came from everywhere, and yet far away at the same time. Maybe it was the echo of the forest, or maybe something attributed it to its abilities. It sounded like a woman yelling in pain and in agony, and yet the voice was half gargled, like it was morphed with that of a dying animal, as it had an underlying low-tone pitch beneath it. It got under the skin of everyone. Those pulling security immediately jumped, scanning left, right, up and down. Hell, even the medic, a big stocky dude who grew up in Brooklyn, played football before he joined, meaning he was yoked as all hell when he got to our unit. The guy who once struck his fingers into a man's neck to plug his blood, even he looked around nervously. What the hell was that? Our weapons sergeant with the M46 shook his head as he scanned the far-off terrain, muttering in a low voice. Some horror movie crap right now. I remember holding my rifle's grip tight. Everyone was equally unnerved. Everyone except the captain. He just told us to press on. "Come on, tighten your jockstrap, let's go." He snapped the lock off. Immediately, the captain and I moved in and cleared the small booth, as 2 more weapons sergeants and our medic took up covering down the gravel road. It was a guard, no name tape or company logo, decked out in a black plate carrier. The plate carrier of which had been torn into, as a large hole covered the entire area of his solar plexus, which was now fragmented and broken inside of his mulched upper body. No bullet entry or exit wounds, just a large stab wound that looks like he got ran through by a lamppost. My breath still got caught in my throat as I grunted to clear it. The captain stepped out of the small booth, spitting hard into the grass and shaking his head. The medic prodded him. "What was it like?" He grunted, walking to the front of our formation. "Doesn't matter, Doc." We formed up and moved down the gravel road in a wedge column. The captain and 3 weapons sergeants in the front wedge, with the medic, me, and the other 2 weapons sergeants in the back one, the comm sergeant in the middle. We entered the facility lot, and immediately the comm sergeant linked up with the captain, and I could hear him alerting Maine.
"This is Raider Lead. We've reached the building."
Though it makes me wonder if he used the comm sergeant's radio to reach our HQ. Who was he talking to on that other channel? The lot was clear and we got a good look at the facility. It was a gray, concrete rectangle maybe the size of a small gas station. Floodlights mounted on the bottom illuminated the gravel lot up to the dense, shadowy wood line that lay just beyond the chain link fence. The wood line that was still quiet. The mass scale carnage that we were told about was present outside of the building. Several guards, all in various states of mutilation, similar to the gate guard, were strewn about the gravel lot. However, unlike the gate guard, strangely, they were in heavier body armor, with rifles capable of going automatic, and spent brass everywhere. Me and some of the other guys got online and cleared out the back. Exasperated breaths and muttering came from all of us. The captain chimed in.
"Raiders on me, time now."
We hauled it back to him as we stacked up at the door. Flowing in, we were greeted to a lobby torn up and furniture thrown everywhere. Impact marks from rounds hitting the concrete lined the walls and ceiling. One dead guard slumped against a red-stained part of the wall, the other in a crumpled heap. A woman at the desk, not a guard, just a staff member, sat back in her chair, her entire torso torn apart. As we passed by her and headed through the double doors behind her, her empty, dead eyes met mine. The comm sergeant eyed her as we all moved for the door. "Sir, she was unarmed. I can see that. Keep chatter to a minimum." We cleared through the double doors to be greeted by a porcelain hallway leading into a set of stairs heading to a sublevel. The entire surface, ceiling, walls, floor, was lined with ceramic white tiles. Ceramic white tiles that were like the rest of the scene so far, stained with the blood, guts, and even brain matter of the unlucky guards laid out all the way down the stairs. I counted 8, 17 so far. A flickering light could be seen through the wire glass windows on the double doors at the bottom. The captain ordered us to flow in through both sides, and we did. Pushing in, we could see that we had entered into a T-style hallway. It gets a bit complicated here. Either end of the T ended while the middle one shot forward far down into a hall leading to 2 reinforced blast doors at the very end. 2 immediate labs on either side were reinforced with more wire glass, and despite several cracks, impact marks, bullet holes, and even holes made in the glass, they held. "This shit can't be ballistic glass," our comm sergeant muttered. "Why didn't they just take cover in here?" the medic said. The captain sighed. "Seems to be pointing to a surprise attack from the inside. Emphasis on surprise." The medic fired back. "Well, sure, but it's just a door." While the hallways outside were a mess of blood, guards thrown around as they were ripped apart, creating a mess of bodies, weapons, and more spent brass, the lab techs had their white coats stained with their own blood. My blood, and I think everybody else's, started to run cold as the pieces came together. Whatever had killed them did so indiscriminately. We formed a rolling T heading down the hallway. I was on the right with the gunner taking center and another guy on the left. The captain pushed forward, leading us from behind. The windowed labs ended halfway with 2 solid white doors near the double doors at the end on either side, leading to closed-off labs. The captain had us pull guard on both of the side doors as the gunner aimed back down the hallway. Everyone else took up security wherever it was needed. The captain eyed the door, feeling the cracks and lines of the blast doors, looking for gaps that didn't exist. Blood had slowly leaked out of the bottom, causing him to pick up his boot and eye it, and yet no openings existed. An electronic pad was positioned on the right side of the doors. The captain eyed it. It was a hand scanner, and I didn't even think those actually existed. He jumped on that private frequency that I keep mentioning. "I'm at the doors. Yeah, at the far end, there's a hand scanner." He waited a few seconds of deafening silence, and he made an internal chuckle as he walked over to the dead body of a guard, kicking its arm. I got one right here. I'm sorry, repeat last. Alive? He rubbed his face, cursing under his breath. Shit, he shook his head, turning on the white light of his rifle and scanning the corpses. This place is a slaughterhouse. How am I gonna? A crash emanated from the white lab door to the right of the blast doors, the one that I was covering. Everybody paused for a second as a second weapons sergeant aimed his laser at it. The captain turned, aiming his laser at the door as he approached. Might have one. Or might have Op 4. One, over. The captain formed up his first man in the stack. An unusual practice, but everybody else fell behind. I was the second man, and 2 more made third and fourth. A weapons sergeant felt the edges of the door and then tried the handle. Locked. Him trying the handle must have alerted whatever was inside because a voice bellowed out. I'm in here, please, I'll let you in, just don't shoot. The doorman looked to the captain who nodded. Might have blue 4 inside, stay sharp, wait on me to fire. There wasn't supposed to be any blue 4 on site. The door's electronic lock opened and the doorman grabbed the handle and pulled it open as the 4 of us entered the room. We pushed through. The captain hooked left, I pushed forward. The other 2 followed one of us respectively. Our lasers centered on the room, and a pair of hands emerging from behind a lab table. Please, the voice weakly shouted. The captain stormed over. Hands, now. I'll shoot you, I swear to God, if you don't put your hands up. As the person stood up, we saw the hands were connected to a scientist, possibly late 30s, stringy hair with circular glasses. Glasses that flew off when the captain closed the distance, shoving him against a metal cabinet. Spittle flying from the bearded mouth beneath the night vision goggles as he barked at him. ID, where is it? Show it. The captain began roughly searching the lab tech as he pulled out his ID. He grabbed it, shoving him to the weapons sergeant on his side of the room. The lab tech was kicked down to his knee. The captain jumped back on that frequency. I'm back. Possible blue 4, prepare for ID code. He read it off in phonetics before he got the response. He looked to the weapons sergeant guarding the lab tech. Get him up. Please, I don't know what's going on. I was just running some chemical tests. We've got to get out of here before. The captain got in the man's face. Shut up, he did. You know what you've been doing. I know what you've been doing out here. Open them doors right now. The man was shocked as the captain continued. Open the doors now. With a point from the captain, the weapons sergeant shoved the man forward into the doorframe. The man crumpled a little bit as the captain laughed. Oh, take your sweet time, doctor. Let's go. I picked him up by his shirt collar and dragged him over to the blast doors. The captain pushed him out of my grip, shoving his face first into the doors. Hand on the scanner, now. As the captain grabbed the man by his wrist, the lab tech struggled to get free. Please, I don't have that access. I hurt my hand trying to hide. Let me go. The medic winced at the sight of it, uncharacteristically of a Green Beret, especially for a jaded-as-all-hell medic. He spoke up. Cap, come on. The captain just turned, staring daggers into the man as he wrestled for the man's wrist. And just wait till y'all see, I'm telling ya. As the man struggled against the captain, the weapons sergeant came up from behind, shoving the man into the blast door, allowing the captain to easily place it on the scanner. The scanner lit up a bright blue as several lines traced and looked over his handprint, and then flashes green as the electronic locks of the blast doors began to open up. The captain dropped the man. Well, good gracious, what do you know? The door slowly pulled open. The room was dark. Red flashing emergency lights flashed all around as the sound of broken glass scraped against the door. A stream of murky blue liquid mixed in with the blood of several guards' bodies that were revealed at the doorway leaked out into the hall. The captain grabbed the lab tech by the collar, dragging him to his feet. "Y'all know these men, Doctor. Friends?" The captain shoved him through the doorway, the lab tech slipping on the fluids and glass, cutting his right hand with a wince. We flowed in and, Jesus. I said this at the start. I've been all over. I've seen mass graves that terrorist cells have used in far-off countries filled with entire villages worth of people. I've seen kill dens inside of tunnel systems. But this, it surpassed all of that. Every horror, every war crime, multiple times over. A series of gigantic glass tubes lined the walls made out of monitors, hard drives, and computer systems. The path of carnage led through the pile of guards at the doorway. That makes 24 armed personnel that were taken out by something. What really bothered me was what was in those murky blue and green glass tubes, as big as a refrigerator connected to a port on the bottom and top. Tubes and wires inside connecting to. The captain shoved the lab tech into a glass tube. The pop of the man's nose echoed off the empty area as he grabbed his nose. "Well, Doc, which one was it? Which tube?" Tube? What was he talking about? How did he know what was on that other frequency? The lab tech spit out blood leaking into his mouth as the captain, standing at 6'5", a giant even among his team full of brawny operators, picked him up by the collar of his blue undershirt. "I don't." Two weapon sergeants ducked out of the way as the captain got in his face, shoving him against the left side wall, causing the monitors and computer systems to beep and light up. "Oh, you don't know. And yet your little hand opens the room that you didn't have access to," he roared, abandoning all silence and discretion now as the man began to sputter and sob. "Please, please, The captain gritted his teeth. He quickly flipped up his nods and stared daggers into the man's soul. "How many people have you snatched off that trail? How many? What kinds of butchering you do to those kids before you stuck them in there? Which one escaped?" Kids, butchering. Something in my mind stopped and I switched on my rifle's tack light. A heavy pit in my stomach formed as I flashed it on the tubes. There were people in those tubes. They were people. Wire and tubes now poked into see-through and murky flesh as the bodies of the kidnapped floated, mutated, dissected, and changed. One person's skin ran reptilian-like up their left arm before merging with a strange gaping hole in their chest, their skull protruding out of the skin in their head. My breathing stuttered a bit as I backed up a few steps, glass crunching under my boots. Curses muttered by the others in the room as we all began to look. Another one's mouth was sealed at the front. Two more jagged, messed up sets of teeth poked out on either side. Their eyes were sealed, skin covering defined sockets on their head. The medic flashed his light on one where the spine stuck out through their back. The vertebrae was larger than a normal person's, the bone sticking out inches longer in some areas. Jesus, man, this is... He gagged a bit, coughing as he looked away. I had to pry my eyes. My mind was frying just looking at it. They better be dead. Oh, I swear to the Lord himself if they ain't, the captain said sternly as the man sobbed and nodded. Yes. The captain raised an eyebrow. You sure? Yes, they died during surgery. If you're lying to me, I swear to Christ, I'll make you euthanize every single one. The captain shoved the lab tech forward into the center of the aisle. I looked down, shaking my head as the images of those things burned into the film of my brain. Where's she gone, Doctor? The captain said sternly, squaring up to the man who sobbed as he shrugged. Where is it? The man continued to cry. It escaped. It killed everyone. It cut through the guards. It cut through everyone. All of my friends. This caused the captain to nearly bust a blood vessel from the look that he gave him, balling up his fist and driving the armored knuckle of his Oakley glove into the gut of the lab tech. This caused the smaller, weaker lab tech to buckle over, dropping to his hand and knees, now favoring an injured hand into probably burst spleen. Your friends? Your friends? You mean the friends that kidnapped a 22-year-old girl and a 14-year-old son and turned them into monsters? What about them? This earned only more sobs from the lab tech as the captain turned, hand on his hips as he scoffed. He looked at the medic who only stared back through his nods. The captain turned to look at him. You've got to the count of 10, and if you don't give me a single whereabouts of this thing, I'm gonna start grabbing tools and cutting your little weasel butt up like y'all did to these kids. The captain loomed over the man, grabbing him by his hair. Sir, please, the lab tech pleaded. 1, 2, 3. The captain counted. Some looked away and others shook their heads. Not out of shame of our leader. There wasn't a man in the room who wouldn't do what he did right now after seeing them. It's in the woods. You heard it. It did its yell like 10 minutes ago. The captain laughed, letting go of the man's hair as he whipped his head forward. Y'all hear that? It's in the woods. He pulled out his M17, his 9mm sidearm, pulling the slide back a bit to make sure that it was chambered. 4, 5, 6. The man stood up, and at this point, I kicked out his extended leg, dropping him back to his knees. The man looked at me and then at the captain. You can't do this. This is illegal. Before the captain could finish his thought, we heard it. It echoed all the way down the facility halls, reverberating off the glass tubes in the room. That half-feminine, half-monstrous cry. Except this time it didn't come from the far-off mountains or trees. It came from up the stairwell. And then the lights went out. I don't know if it was prior damage to the facility, the electric works, or something else, but they zapped out. The lights in the halls, the lights on the stairs, the lights in the room, the electronics, the lights in the tanks, I mean all of it. It cried out again, and this time, I think I heard it say, "Help me." Anybody who had their nods up flicked them down as all of us trained our lasers down the dark hall beyond the doors. The slight shakiness of all the green lasers told the same stories. All of the death, all of the shit in the tanks, it had everybody spooked. The captain came up alongside me and the medic. He looked back to the lab tech. You run, you die. The man swallowed and smothered his misery. I know. The captain corrected him in a low tone. No, you really don't. The creature cried out again. Help me. The sounds of something hard impacting the tile floor sounded out as it approached us through the dark abyss. More footsteps and then another cry. Help me. The gunner lets out a shaky breath as he cracks his neck. More footsteps and then another cry. Help me. It's maybe 5 meters from the door now. Lord Almighty, the captain muttered. I couldn't see much in that darkness then, but I saw what everybody else saw. I saw enough. Its body was easily 6 feet tall. 2 gigantic, bony, mantis-like legs that were dark from blood stepped into the doorway. Its head was smooth, its large teeth shining in the darkness, and its eyes glowed like an animal. Its eyes glowed. It could see us. We all froze. We had rifles trained on it, a machine gun trained on it, a room full of green berets, I mean the best of the best, and everybody froze. The captain was the first to fire, slamming his trigger as he shot a 223 death into that crime against existence. The gunner opened up as well, and then the medic. 2 more weapons sergeants also shot it. It yelled at us, cried out, like an agonized woman pleading for help. And then it lunged. Running and slamming through a test tube, glass flew everywhere, causing several of us to shield our faces. As the water flooded the floor and the deformed body that was inside flopped down near our feet, a horrendous, rotted smell filled the air. "Jesus!" the medic sputtered out, gagging a bit as he kicked it away. The creature now screamed as a rifleman near it jumped back. It leapt on top of him, shoving that bony mandible into his left shoulder, pinning him to the ground as he screamed, thrashing his elbow into the thing as he kicked its stomach. But it didn't attack him, it just eyed the scientist. He attempted to run for his life, but the thing jumped on top of him, pinning him face first into the murky wet floor. And that's when I noticed the 6 smaller human-like arms on its torso. Its main mandible pinned him to the ground, the arms, some normal, some with bony spikes for fingers. Others, just lined with sharp teeth, began to rip into the man's back. The lab tech screamed as lab coat was torn open as it began to dig down into his back. Some still fired shots, but it didn't even react. It didn't even move. It just continued to tear into that vile, poor son of a gun. The captain's voice lit up the comms as he and the medic rushed to pick the rifleman up and heave him on the captain's shoulders.
"We can't engage him here, outside, now."
He was right. It thrived on close quarters. It ran guys through before they could pick it apart. We all ran, nerves shot, weapons hot from firing into a thing that didn't react. The power off so that we couldn't close those blast doors. All we could do was run. I nearly slipped on the glass as we booked it out of there, firing some desperate pot shots into the lab with the gunner. The lab tech's screams echoed throughout the hallway as we booked it up the stairs. It was going to be done with him soon. The gunner and I covered the captain as we broke out into the open air, the smell of rot and death replaced by the open piney air of the forest. Several men broke out road flares, tossing them everywhere, giving us much-needed light in the form of greens, blues, reds, and purples. The captain dropped the man behind a beaten-up and wrecked sedan as the medic began to patch him up. The gunner deployed his bipod and aimed at the doors of the facility from the car's hood. The captain positioned different men to where they could all fire on the door, far enough away from the thing's grasp. "Romero, get on that net and call in the air." The comm sergeant began to go to work behind the sedan. I took aim behind a large SUV with several others, and we all aimed at the door. The screaming had stopped. The silence was broken by its bony mandibles as it rushed out into the open air, and with all the flares and chem lights and even the captain's tack light, we finally got a good look. Its skin was a mix between pink from exposed muscle to a see-through clear layer covering other parts. Bony calcium-like armor had formed over a lot of its body, and its back to its legs formed smaller mandible-like features at the back, and its head, an exposed skull, all 2 human eyes peering out in rage, as its larger, unhinged jaw opened and it roared out its deafening cry at us. The gunner was the first to open up. The blast of a 5.56 tore through the armor on its mandible legs and torso. The thing recoiled at first and then hissed as it charged forward. The captain ran from his place in front of the sedan's side. The thing stuck its 2 large mandibles into the roof, badly denting it. The medic quickly covered the wounded weapons sergeant, shielding him as the thing peered down at the 2. The captain quickly got its attention, aiming fire at the back of its head. It roared with a vengeance as it charged at the captain. He fell back to the sedan, running out of our line of fire as the thing barreled towards us. The thing stuck a mandible inside the hood, impaling it, and then another just to my left. I circled around and behind it as I fired. It cried out, blood now pouring from its wounds, as its calcium plating was cracking and falling off in mass. The thing turned to me, and as I flicked my M4 to auto and laid into it, it just barreled at me, shoving me to the ground. Its smaller, demonic hands reached for me as I kicked them away. Its jaw snapped. as I held my rifle in the way, shielding my face as it gnawed on the metal. The gunner then blasted a chunk of its exposed skull away, staggering it as it turned the captain and whipped his stock into the thing's head and then backpedaled as he fired off another burst of rounds. The thing turned at him, roaring viciously as the captain dropped his empty mag. He slapped in a fresh one as the thing lunged at him, both mandibles raised. The glass exploded out of the SUV windows as the captain dropped levels, firing into its stomach as he circled out back into the open. The creature roared as it went to move for him again, but it couldn't. Its large mandibles were stuck all the way inside of the vehicle. The captain left his rifle hang slung on his front as he reached for something on his kit. An M67 fragmentation grenade. Get back! Everyone who was in the open ducked for cover. The gunner and several weapons sergeants retreated behind a series of concrete jersey barriers. I ran and slid behind the sedan, helping the medic to shield our wounded battle buddy. I heard the distinct sound of the spoon flying and the whistling of the grenade. The captain vaulted himself over the car hood with the comm sergeant, covering his radio operator's head as they both went prone. The explosion was thunderous. The shockwave of the grenade shook everyone and even rattled me a bit from being so close. Shrapnel and fragments flew everywhere, impacting the concrete barriers, the building. Any windows on the sedan that already weren't broken were shattered. A few seconds passed as we all hesitantly started to lift our heads and then drop them as the SUV's gas tank seemingly erupted and detonated, engulfing the wreck in a fireball too large that I felt like the flames were touching my face. The captain popped up, aiming on top of the hood of the car, and then I and several others joined him, peeking from behind our points of cover as we looked to see if that had done it. The SUV was a burning skeleton. An inferno from all of the ignited gasoline covered the frame, the ground around it, and the beast, as it definitely pulled its last remaining mandible, its front left one, the only appendage that it had left, and stumbled out from the flames. Its skin popped, its muscles boiled, and with all of the see-through skin and bone plating torn and burnt off, it gazed around, its eyes ruptured and melted. Help me. The gravel crunched as its charred and still burning body slumped forward. The captain emerged from behind the SUV as only a few of us dared to approach the thing. He lifted his nods, this time pulling his M17 back up and aiming it at the thing's head. 3 shots into the thing's head, the damaged and charred skull caving in. A circle of light illuminated us as the rotary blades of the Blackhawk sounded out overhead. I shielded my face and lifted my nods to avoid the spotlight blinding me.
Op 4, actual, down, building secure.
The ensuing hour was one that was just shrouded in, mystery, I guess. The captain went against prior missions of telling us to go prone and pull security, putting the gunner at the sedan by the gate and telling the rest of us to watch the wood line. When the van showed up, that's when he told us to chill out. And there really weren't vans, they were more like armored trucks. Not for the sake of being classified and remaining anonymous, I can't divulge a lot about them. I'm definitely not saying the black shirts were wearing black multicam combat uniforms, with kits, weapons, and gear available that would definitely make them a private sector group. I'm not saying their uniforms were sterilized with all patches, logos, and markers stripped. I'm also not saying that the hazmat suits looked way beyond anything that our MOPE system has. I'm not saying they brought several metal cases in from their armored Vics, and I'm not saying they brought an advanced surveillance drone with them. I will say that they weren't really hostile. Heck, one even offered us a cigarette. The bird landed at the opposite side of the building, the open lot where they eventually told us to head. We prepared our guy for case vac on a litter with the Blackhawk and loaded up as the captain finished talking to some guy in a suit. He was much shorter, maybe 5'8". He bore the look of a younger but still weathered man. His hair slicked back and had a hard part. A slight bump underneath his sports coat told me that he was armed. The captain eventually joined us as soon as the aviation crew shut the door. He popped his helmet off and much to their anger and slumped back in his seat. When we touched base and got back to the COP, our sister team, Artemis, replaced us on QRF. I've been thinking about that shit for days now, about what those people did to them in that lab, what the captain said. They kidnapped them, cut them up, changed them. All for what? Some sick fantasy? Who even owned that lab? There were no US markings, no logos, zip. Like I said before, there's still a lot that I don't know, but what I do know is that those people got exactly what they deserved. That thing crying out for help, pleading for us to make its suffering end. The more that I think about it, the more it makes me sick. I don't know what those guys were that relieved us. They didn't have any markings. Some of them were speaking German if my memory serves. But whoever they were, I hope they learn from their mistakes and never tamper with that evil stuff again. Today's episode is sponsored by HelloFresh. Tired of figuring out what's for dinner night after night, especially on those busy weekdays? Get dinner done the easy way thanks to HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you get farm-fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Plus, HelloFresh has new ready-made meals that go from the fridge to your fork in just 3 minutes. It's the same high-quality ingredients and restaurant-worthy flavor you expect from HelloFresh, just with none of the work. I recently tried the pub-style shepherd's pie. It was perfect with the cold weather we've been having, and it tasted delicious too. I definitely recommend it. Get up to 10 free meals and a free high-protein item for life at HelloFresh.com/MrCreeps10FM. 1 item per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on first box. New subscribers only, and it varies by plan. That's up to 10 free HelloFresh meals. Just go to HelloFresh.com/MrCreeps10FM. Thanks again to HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. I am a member of a special operations force in the Danish Royal Navy, more popularly known as the Danish Frogmen. For those of you who are well knowledgeable on international special forces, you've probably seen that now famous photo of a fire team aboard a boat with veils obscuring their faces. That is also probably one of the only pieces of information that you've ever received on us, as my home country's Naval Special Warfare Unit is shrouded in mystery for a good reason. We are NATO's silent workhorse, having followed larger nations and militaries into conflict zones such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, the Balkans, and to some places that aren't declassified. Out of the nearly 600 applicants that we get every year, less than a dozen actually make it in, and fewer still are able to give up everything to make this a long-term career. I am one of the few, and I have been with the teams for several years and have found great pride in my service. Above all, I have been committed to every aspect of my job, and that includes the vow of silence we take. That is, until today. I have waged war against men from every corner of the world, state-sanctioned and true believer, terrorist, yet the fight that shook me to my core wasn't on some far-off battlefield, but right here at home. For the sake of those that I've served with and lost, code names will be used to obscure their identity and mine. I lead a 4-man team element under a larger squadron. Codfish, as I'll call him, is our comms man, skilled in being able to obtain and maintain connection no matter the environment, no matter the equipment. For those of you who are in, say, the American or British militaries, we use these same ANPRC radio series that you guys do, and yes, they do suck. However, Codfish has always been able to make do, which is why I fought so hard to keep him on my team. Next is my designated marksman, anglerfish. Frogman teams are commonly used as a reconnaissance element to move ahead of a larger element and act as an early warning or a forward guard. Anglerfish is an essential part of that as he utilizes a powerful scope to help detail the path and its terrain around it, along with being able to reach out and touch anyone we need removed. The pipeline for becoming a Danish sniper is one of the most grueling and humbling courses you could take, and it requires a fair amount of calculation, humility, and control. He is all of these things. On the other side of the spectrum, we have my gunner, Largemouth. Any military element assembled needs a suitable amount of firepower in case things go wrong, because they can and almost certainly will. Largemouth is one of the junior guys on my unit and thus is being given a simple yet important task to maintain: the team's fire support. Despite his inexperience, his ability to maintain rates of fire and ammo count, and keep his head down and do it all under the mission set of a frogman. And then there's me, Kraken. I've served with the unit for almost 10 years now, experienced in 4 official theaters and 2 classified ones. My CO calls me his hammer, the one he sent in to take an objective that is absolutely essential. Okay, now that you've got the context of my team, let's get down to it. Danish SOCOM is seen as one of NATO's finest units, and because of that, it's not uncommon for us to be called upon even as we were back home. However, when I got the text for my team to spin up, I was surprised to learn that we weren't going to any active theater but something right here at home. In total, our complete element was around 12 servicemen, and all of us were ushered into one of the briefing rooms per usual. However, details were slim to none. It all started with the arrival of that damned fog. It's not uncommon this was during the height of the breakup season after all, well into the snow completely thawing and giving way to humidity and rain, with much of the northern marshlands near the north coast experiencing this. However, this wasn't normal. Centering around a small village over the course of 3 weeks, all communications went from sporadic to broken to nothing. The military wanted to get involved at first, however the government wanted the locals to handle it, leave it to them to let things go from bad to worse. Investigators were sent in and immediately all contact was lost with them. After several days, only one transmission came from the town before everything went silent.
We're with her now. We have no need for our flesh or the outside world. She's giving us all we need. She's going to make us beautiful.
Finally, the Royal Navy was set loose and things only got more complicated from there. UAVs were sent in to try and survey the area, only to find almost the entire area beyond the village was engulfed in a dense fog that a 30 million krone drone was unable to penetrate with neither thermal, IRS, or anything. With these situations seeming dire, SOCOM prepared a full maneuver and needed their best to be the tip of the spear. And so, the frogmen were called upon. This wasn't an unusual mission for us. There was no knowledge of enemy combatants that we could rationalize and then distance ourselves from. This was the unknown. A village on our home soil was being held hostage by something. We didn't know what. But what we did know was that every single soul that lived there was waiting for us to swoop in and help. And by every soul that we have ever failed, every god that has ever lived, we were going to. The walk out to the tarmac seemed a lot more tense than it normally had, and for reasons unknown to me, the insertion would occur at nighttime. Maybe our command believed our usual tactics of night infiltration would give us an advantage prior missions did not. Whatever it was, they were wrong. Usually we would be climbing aboard a plane to be sent to a different continent. However, instead, we loaded up into a Lynx, a British dual twin-engined helicopter used for close insert. This felt a lot more like a deployment than it did home turf. The flight was short, 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. I kept gripping my rifle, an MK-18, a short-barreled rifle imported from the US. Plenty of the corps had started to use the new SIG MCXs, but my quad-railed workhorse had carried me through several tours, so like my team, I trusted it. Even inside of the helicopter with noise-canceling headphones, the sound of the engine was deafening. shaking my skull and combating the unsure scenario that had gripped my mind. I looked up to see Largemouth locking eyes with me. Nodding with a thumbs up, I returned the gesture. No matter what we would face, we would encounter it together. We arrived at a staging ground near the Yurgirby River. The fog complicated things to the point where an LZ for a bird couldn't be planned. Not just because of any possible Op4 in the area of operation, but well, the mist wouldn't allow the pilots to see any trees or flora, which could turn a quick landing into a mass casualty scenario. So we did things the frogman way from the water. A rigid hull inflatable boat or a Zodiac. They're the inflatable boats seen in every action movie. They're cumbersome, they get shaken and thrown by any small waves, and they're all around just a damn pain to use. However, they're somewhat still the most reliable source of redundant amphibious transportation that we had second to swimming. Our CO gave us our ramp brief right then and there in the dock. It was short and to the point. Whatever mist exists seems to be screwing with the comms. Whether it's moisture or something else, they're going to have to formulate a conclusion as to what's going on, and if they can, neutralize it. If not, we were to cut fall back and let the heavy guns roll in. We knew what that meant, and that we had better hope we could find a much cleaner solution while we were on the ground. A pit in my stomach formed as we all stepped onto our rubber chariot and started off. With darkness fully set in, the naked eye couldn't see anything, and so we took to using our GPNFGs, quad nods as some would say, a set of 4 tubes allowing for a wide view that made the dark seem as clear as day, albeit with a white and blue hue. This allowed us to safely travel down the river, anglerfish taking point, largemouth sat near the front in case we took any incoming fire, codfish and I on either side. However, the ride got slower as we finally encountered the fog. It seemed almost as if one moment it was there and the next it was all over us. You could barely see the edges of the river and the green near it, so Angler had to crank way the hell down. It then became a slow crawl through the marsh, our Zodiac turning left and right through the weaving river as the IR lasers mounted to our weapons scanned across the edges of the fog, ready in case anything were to test us. And then, we were only a few kilometers from the village when the engine suddenly died. 1 second the low hum of the propellers, and the next it was off. This caused Angler to gaze back in surprise, a low mutter of, "What the hell?" Largemouth kept watch as the rest of us moved to inspect the engine. Codfish opened it up and was astounded. "It's in perfect condition," he muttered, looking up at me. "Something's preventing it from igniting, so it just won't start." As he continued to dig deeper into the engine, triple-checking to make sure his assessment wasn't wrong, I sat there debating our options as the Zodiac drifted to a halt as the water remained deathly still, leaving us all in a permeable silence. That's what I had noticed first. The silence. We frogmen spend a lot of time in the field, figuratively and literally soaking in nature's worst yet most pure conditions. I've spent a lot of time up to my mouth in swamp water and mud. And taking in nature, you realize something. There is always some sort of sound. A cricket, a bird, anything. Heat had returned to Europe, so the winter's cold wasn't in effect. Living creatures had come out of hibernation, and there are some LZs that I've been to where these cicadas are so loud that we had to yell at each other in order to hear. And yet here, dead silence, all ambient sound muffled by whatever the hell this fog was made of, and the water was still. This was an active river, there should be some sort of current. And yet, whatever was in these woods commanded its respect. The forest around us was much more afraid of it than it was a team of Danish Special Forces operatives. We had to tread carefully. I reached for something on my vest, a push-to-talk device that connected our headsets to a team frequency. Usually we were close enough to not need it, however it helped to minimize the amount of noise it made. "We aren't getting any further on water, we need to ditch the raft and head in on foot," I said. Codfish gave up on the engine and took up a watch position. From over the channel, Anglerfish asked,
"What about our exfil?"
We'll have to take the long way out," I responded. slinging my rifle as I braced myself and dropped feet first into the icy river and dragged the raft to shore. As we stepped foot on soil, we beached the craft and maneuvered forward in a wedge. Largemouth to my right, anglerfish to my left, as he always seemed to help pick the best route to maneuver on. Codfish further back to keep our comms out of direct fire. The mist gave us little to no line of sight, only being able to see around 5 meters ahead of us at the most, and that was it. An ambush could be waiting around any stump any long. The trees were so condensed it meant that we had to twist and turn with every single step. And above all, I felt watched. I don't mean by my team, by something from beyond the veil. Predatory, malicious. It was burning a hole through my soul. Watching us, waiting. This wasn't ideal, and we were only a couple of steps from Fubar. Finally, through the milky gray wall, I finally caught sight of what we had been waiting for. The rooftop corner of a one-floor house and part of a wooden fence, poking through the fog like bones to be uncovered. The air was still, too still considering the port that we had departed from was as windy as could be. I quickly motioned for my team to halt. Everybody stopped on a dime with not a sound between us. From there, we took up positions. Largemouth took cover behind a large tree and sighted what seemed to be the road into town just to our 9 o'clock. Denmark's roads are decent, but this far out, it left a considerable amount of dirt, cracks, and wear to be seen. Anglerfish covered our 3 o'clock, and Codfish knelt down and heaved his radio pack up off his back. The unit was green brick, only visible from the antenna that remained half extended through the top of his bag. Fishing out the hand mic, he prepared to update our unit on our progress. That was until he muttered under his breath in pain, dropping the hand mic. "What the hell?" "It shocked me," he said, favoring his hand. "That wasn't good. These radios were lined with plastic and metal preventing any sort of harm to the user." Codfish tried again, keying into the hand mic, however, and shook his head. "I'm getting nothing," he said as he unzipped the bag and revealed the screen and button pad of the radio. To our surprise, it was dead. No frequency, no information, nothing. "You made sure the battery pack was fresh, right?" I asked to Codfish's conclusion as he pulled the metal brick from the bag. "Of course, I don't." "What the?" Codfish's words trailed off when he opened up the radio. The beige square battery, along with the entire inside of the radio, was layered with moss. He had to fight to pry the battery out, showing that it was caked in it, along with a ton of condensation. "You know how to maintain your equipment," Largemouth said, gazing at the sight as he went back to scanning the road. "Oh, shut your mouth, of course I do," Codfish snapped back in a harsh whisper. It wasn't uncommon for moisture in a fog this thick to leak through bags, fatigues, rocks. But these radios were, under reasonable circumstances, able to hold up against being rained on for a considerable amount of time. That, and when the batteries are locked in, the compartment is virtually sealed. And it was inside a waterproof bag. Codfish hadn't dropped into the river as well. Something wasn't right. The more we fussed over the radio, the more it seemed the darkness around us was closing in, smothering us. "You think your Harris can reach it?" I asked, referencing the smaller radio mounted to his vest. We all had them to communicate throughout our headsets if need be, and they could reach out quite a ways. However, a proper radio unit was needed for sustainable communication. He switched to the radio and keyed in.
"Any station on this net, I am requesting a radio check."
I heard his words buzz through my headset. Only silence answered, and so I tried. "Element lead to main, radio check over. Any station?" Nothing. Although no words were said, I could feel the unanimous feeling of dread wash over all of us. "Pick up, we're heading in," I said, rising to my feet. "What about our comms? We've got no way to alert Maine," Codfish asked, packing away his radio. "We still need to figure out what's happened. No info, no point of us being here, and we're all sitting ducks." I explained. I looked to Largemouth. "You got anything?" He shook his head. "Negative, road is empty," scanning with his MG3. At the very least, we still had the elements of surprise, hopefully. What about you? I asked Anglerfish. No response from my designated marksman as he continued to stare out into the swamp, his rifle braced against the tree. I looked at Codfish, who gazed back, a mutual look of nervousness. I called out to Anglerfish again, and after a moment he seemed to shake his head, coming out of disassociation. No, nothing, he said, picking up and preparing to move. You good? I asked, locking eyes with his tubes as he slowly turned, staring at me. Yeah, he said in a low tone. A pit in my stomach grew deeper with every single step we took into that hell. However, I didn't have the luxury of stopping for long. None of us did. I had my team form into a diamond. Codfish and Anglerfish to my right and left, with largemouth covering our back. The roads were definitely experiencing the effects of the rainy season after several weeks of no maintenance, as a layer of mud and gravel caked the surface. The houses around us were dark, filled with shadows and pitch-black voids, a mix of old-style stone and hay and newer brick houses with wooden tiles. However, all of them looked deserted. I probably would have been shivering from the wet cold of the air had adrenaline not been pumping through every vein in my body. The low visibility of the fog and darkness left 1,000 avenues of ambush and approach that needed to be covered for a million possibilities. Our home was being overrun by whatever the parasitic mist had brought, and every single step we took drew us further and further into this mobile kill box. And I could tell my men were feeling it. Codfish focused far too much on certain windows and shadows, causing him to quickly yet messily snap to a few points. From the corner of my vision through the white blue of my nods, I could see Largemouth's head snapping back again and again, yet Anglerfish seemed distant. Snipers needed to be calm, comfortable in uncomfortable situations, but he seemed too much to the point of complacent. I wanted to call it out, yet a shape from my front caused me to halt my team. We all took a knee trying to hug the side of the road for cover as we were in the worst possible position. It was rectangular, 4 doors with a license plate that read AW65683, with a light bar on the top. Through the low light I could see it was white with jagged markings, a police patrol vehicle. The front and rear left side doors were opened. The back window was smashed from a circular impact mark, blunt force trauma, a rock or a brick. No signs of life from where we were. We moved in, Anglerfish and Largemouth took the right side. IR lasers scanning through as Codfish and I cleared the open left. It was empty. I and my team set in as I ordered Codfish to inspect the radios, seeing if there was anything that we could work with. After a few seconds he called me over. He was leaning in on the passengers. I slid in the driver's head, flipping up my night vision. Codfish shined a red light and it was how he illuminated an area that we needed to see without nods, without giving up our position light a white light would. It wasn't that great, but as the red glow shined over the dashboard where a radio should be, only an empty radio mounted remained, covered in moss. In fact, the entire inside of the vehicle was dripping wet. While I initially thought it was the fog, the similarities to our radio sent a chill up my spine. "What do you think?" Codfish asked. What did I think? I knew that whatever cut off our ability to contact our support did so to the local forces. It was attempting to dissect through severing information chains. I knew that something was watching us, as every pore on my back felt like it was on fire from something staring into it. This fog was a screening device. It aided the town, deteriorating it, taking the people and leaving ghosts behind. However, my team was on edge already, and the last thing that I needed to do was rile them up. "We need to keep moving," I muttered. Codfish hesitated for a second before exiting the vehicle. We kept maneuvering down the road. Nothing but shadows and silence greeted us as you could hear the sounds of our boots treading through the mud and rock from every corner of this place. And per our orders, we tried to locate any person and look for any signs of life. To no avail. Doors remained unlocked and opened. As we quietly breached and entered, we found no one. Just a layer of dust and water over everything. This continued for house after house as we tried our best to clear through, investigate, and came up with nothing. But still I waited, wondering where the first strike was going to come from. We were in no position to make it, not since we had stepped off those docks. We were the best of the best, and I was leading us to our demise. We had reached the center point of the village, a large stone church with a main tower that jutted up at least 20 meters high, piercing the fog. In fact, the mist seemed to get thinner the closer that we got to it. My laser traced the stained glass windows and doors, the slits beside the doors, the stone stairs. It might be a good point to rest at, I said, turning back to Largemouth. Cover the road, I'm going to. Our low-toned discussion was cut off by a loud bang that shook the silence of the village. The crack and thoom jolted us awake as instincts took over, a sound that we were all too familiar with. A gunshot. It had arrived. Contact, Largemouth yelled, seeing the assailant before I had. He took aim at the church door with an MG3 and let loose. The German belt-fed machine gun is referred to as the buzzsaw for good reason. In another time, another life, it had acted as a human wave reducer. And now, our best chance at survival as it tore through the wood with a thunderous burst. The rest of us quickly rushed to the church's stone wall, taking cover as Largemouth placed his gun on the top face of it. We were in no position to burn ammo with no comms and then no chance for resupply, and so I called, "Watch and shoot." Codfish covered us from behind as Angler took aim at the church with Largemouth. I kept my back to the wall and looked over at my gunner. "What did you see?" A handgun from between the doors cracked off a shot. Largemouth said, sights glued to the front of the church. "Aimed at us," I asked to confirm. However, he retorted, "It was aimed out when it fired. Likely just a bad shot, lucky for us." Codfish immediately snapped at Largemouth. "You didn't even confirm if it was firing at us. It could be a scared civilian." "We saw the patrol vehicle. The police were compromised," Largemouth argued. "Oh, both of you shut it," I barked, silencing their feud. "We need to move. Our position is no longer a secret," Anglerfish muttered, gazing at the fog. My eyes followed his as I muttered, "It never was." Wait, please," a voice from the church called out. Anglerfish and I quickly had our sights trained in the door with Largemouth as Codfish kept watch elsewhere. From the doors, the handgun, a revolver, was tossed out to the steps, as a police officer carefully stepped out, arms raised. Largemouth looked at me as I peeked over the wall. "We're Royal Army, identify yourself." The man's head dipped back in relief. "Oh, thank God. I'm Officer Leister," he said, confirming his affiliation. I stood up, a leap of faith that was returned when the officer dropped his hands. He then looked around, anxious of the situation as he gestured us inside. "Quickly, that exchange will not go unnoticed." Although Largemouth showed obvious signs of hesitation, I took the lead, stating, "Pick up your weapon, you're gonna need it." Leister then grabbed his revolver and ushered us in. Inside the church, we had finally found it. Signs of life, or what was left anyways. Village inhabitants had taken cover behind pews and tables, dimly lit candles illuminating the central area as the windows had been covered with curtains and blankets. The silence of the church broke out into relieved sighs and mutters as we entered. Mothers hugged daughters and sons, grandmothers, but little to no males aside from Leister and a couple of other officers. I took this chance to flip up my nods. Leister quickly shoved what was left of the door closed as another officer barred it. Largemouth pulled off his helmet as I could see steam from his hot sweat entering the cool air. "Why'd you open fire?" I asked Leister, who rubbed his temples embarrassed. I thought you were one of them," Leister said cryptically, deepening the pit in my stomach as I asked. "Them?" Leister then gestured to behind us. The church's priest greeted us, bowing his head. "We are so glad to see you. We are running desperately low," the old man said, tears welling up in his eyes. "It's all right," Largemouth said, setting the MG3 down on its biped as he knelt. From what I can only guess was him attempting to alleviate the back pain that every machine gunner felt. I ordered Anglerfish to take up a good overwatch position, to which he immediately climbed a small set of scaffolds used to help replace and maintain the church's windows, stopping at a circular one above the doors. "I heard you say that you were Army," the priest said. I nodded. "Our radios are down, so for now it's only us. we've been sent in as the forward element to figure out what happened here. It's a swamp witch, Officer Leister muttered. Repeat that, a what? Codfish asked. Not just any, the priest said. He paused for a moment, locking eyes with all three of us before he took a shaky inhale and explained. Over the past several years, the children who lived here said that they saw the current in the nearby bayou break. However, something changed. When the rainy season arrived, the mist that would come and go didn't leave, and as our home became more and more shrouded, people began to disappear. First the men and then the police when they tried to investigate. Before long, people started to take refuge. I looked to Leister, dread filling his eyes as he looked to the floor and then back to me. I tried to lead a search party out there, he said, breaking off as he fought to steady his voice. We couldn't even see what was taking our guys out there before it was just me and a handful of others, he said. I looked back to the priest. Despair of the past several weeks was clashing with the relief of us being here. Even if it was just the four of us, it was hope to them. So, what the hell is it? Nixie, the priest stated, forcing his mouth to utter the word like it was a damn tax. Some tales describe her as malicious, a being that lurks the swamps hoping to kidnap. Others describe her as curious. This seems to be the former. This was a lot to take in, some sort of legend from the folklore that was entrenched in our home as the soil and dirt was. I wanted to believe it was hysteria, the priest and officer attempting to rationalize it. But that didn't explain the fog, the moss, the feeling of being watched, the disappearances. Them. Wait, what did you mean by them? I quickly asked Leister. Just as he was about to speak, Anglerfish called down. We've got movement. Front of the church, wood line from R10 to R3. He started, checking the chamber of his rifle. Leister's eyes quickly locked with mine. You're about to find out. Once again, my instinct as a leader took over. I ordered the priest to get everybody to the safest position they could, which is he then called out. To the cellar, hurry. An anxious yet surprisingly orderly stampede filled the church as the dozens inside hurried underground. I grabbed Leister by the arm and told him and his officer to get down there and keep the people safe, but not before saying, blow out every light you got here, we need it dark. Leister nodded, snapping into action as he and his men put out every single candle that they could. I flipped on my nods, and what was once a warm and orange room became a dark blue and white battlefield. Largemouth was already set up, poking his MG3 through a gap in the broken wooden door, as Codfish took aim through one of these slits beside it. With no entrances on any other side of the church, we prepared to defend the front. I peeked through the other slit beside the door, rifle first, my suppressor leading as all our eyes were glued to the wood line across the street that our IR lasers scanned intensely like a light show. And what I saw sent a shiver down my spine. People, the disappeared, those taken, all walked through the marsh and tall grass across from the church. The butcher, tailor, and all those in between and many of the lost officers all walked to the edge of the road and stopped. Their movements were unnatural in the way they just stood there opposing us, daring us. A leader amongst them emerged, the police chief. Even from across the street I could see the blank face that he had as he stared wide-eyed at us. Silence filled the church and then broken up by the muffled cries of the civilians downstairs. Mothers trying to desperately calm their children. The thing that was the police chief then spoke. His voice monotone like a puppet being controlled, yet his words came out smoothly. Too smoothly. Come on out. We need not fight. A minute of silence passed. I gazed over to Codfish, who gazed back. Largemouth was locked in place, taking aim. There was no playbook on this. How in the hell were you supposed to negotiate with a thing, a paranormal anomaly? I barked back with whatever I could think of. What did Nixie offer you? More happiness than we had ever known. His answer was immediate, and the artificial attempt at emotion behind his words shook something deep down inside of me. His voice echoed across the chapel as he continued. You can feel it too, as can all of them. Just come outside. What's the play? Anglerfish asked. We should just lay into them, Largemouth suggested. Codfish scoffed. Enough of your bullheadedness, he muttered. I looked out and gazed at the chief, who even now I felt was looking directly at me. You're gonna betray everybody you swore to protect, the woman, the children, I asked. And then a smile crossed his face as he said, Oh, don't worry. Once the children went underneath, they've never felt pain again. My throat ran dry. The last thing I heard was Largemouth angrily cursing beneath his breath as he let loose. The retrofitted suppressor that he had mounted onto the front of his gun barely contained the thunderous sound of a long burst of rounds as they tore through the night, yellow and red. The brick of the church shook, the door swayed slightly, and I saw the tracers and rounds tear the police chief in half where he stood. And then the horde, mounted at the edge of the marsh, rushed the chapel. Their faces were filled with an animalistic rage. They crushed grass, branches, vaulted the stone fence, and yet they were completely silent and smiling. Engage, engage, I screamed. The sound barrier of the mist battling Largemouth's controlled bursts of violence as groups of them were cut down at a time, a pile of brass building up around him. Even then, some still tried to crawl as pieces of themselves hung off by tendon and flesh. Their commandeered bodies now had only one goal: breach the church and commit unspeakable horrors to those inside, and we would not allow that. Those that reached the windows were taken down by Codfish and I, who with controlled groups of 2 and 3 rounds kept the swarm at bay. I still remember it. A series of hands reaching inside, fingers trying to grasp onto anything. 3 shots tear through the palms, hit one in the head and drops them instantly. Another salvo, another down. They were once my countrymen and now my enemy. Prior allegiances didn't matter now. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. I remember hitting the release and letting the metal mag drop to the floor as I shoved a new one in and hit the bolt release, replenishing my weapon. Make your shots count, I yelled. Last thing we wanted was all of our ammo burned through. And just then the worst call-out I could ever imagine reached my ears. "The soldier!" a woman yelled from beneath the cellar. There was no way they could have entered. We had every entrance covered, that we knew of. I yelled at my team to stand their ground as I rushed to the cellar, quickly rounding a small banister and heading down the steps. I saw the dark cellar was bathed in the blue ambient light of the outside. Dozens of people were huddled against the walls. Hysterical screams and the tearing of flesh could be heard as I came face to face with them. One was a man, the other a police officer. Both were coming through a storm door and locked eyes with me. Their eyes, even now it haunts me. No pupils, no color, just a milky white. When they saw me, they took off after me. 6 shots, 2 to the heads of both at just a couple of meters. The sound of my suppressed barrel bounced off the walls in the room, undoubtedly deafening anybody close. Many grabbed their ears, screaming as the 2 assailants hit the ground. I fired an additional round into the bodies, now wanting a demonic round 2. "Leister!" I screamed, looking around. It seemed as if the entire wall moved. A hulking thrall turned, eyes glowing milky white as it turned and growled. I raised my barrel to fire only for the Goliath to swipe it aside, grabbing me by the front of my plate carrier and throwing me into a stone column. My back hit the wall and my helmet hit the column, shaking my brain as my instinct forced me to rise off the floor, sore as hell. I had to keep going. I messily raised my MK-18, firing off several rounds into its legs that only seemed to slow it. And then it grabbed me around the neck. I could feel my life fading as it squeezed, a vice grip causing me to gasp and sputter, a wretched smile gracing its face. My other hand, unable to reach for anything, fought to keep its other mitt from my neck. And then, a yell came from behind as the priest appeared from the dark and raised an axe in the air and came down onto its back. The creature yelled. From his left, one of the village women shoved a candle stand into its face, stunning it. With his hold on my throat loosened, oxygen returned. My hand quickly went to my holster, drawing my Glock from its Kydex prison as I shoved it well into its mouth, firing off shot after shot. Thankfully, whoever made that perfect Austrian handgun decided to not pull the safety that mattered. The rounds echoed off, unsuppressed muzzle blast, stripping away skin from the entry as wounds painted the ceiling with its vile insides. As it fell down, my body moved like clockwork, holstered my pistol, raised my rifle, and switched to auto, and riddled its body burst after burst. My gun went dry, I dropped a magazine, inserted another, and hit the release. Click. The priest quickly moved to secure the storm door. I looked around, locating Leicester. God. He was slumped against the wall that the behemoth had been at. As I knelt down beside the fallen officer, he coughed up blood, trying to roll over, but my hand snapped to his shoulder, keeping him pinned. The brute had done a number on him, tearing open his stomach. It was a mess of organ, flesh, and blood. Even with my nods on, I could barely fight to keep my face from being sickened and mournful. He looked at me with weak eyes. "Is it bad?" he asked, and my silence was his answer. "Damn, I guess this is my penance for my failure," Leicester said, blood beginning to pour out the side of his mouth as he turned to me. "None of that. Save your breath, officer." The last thing that he needed to do was dump all of his oxygen, blaming himself. Nothing that he could have done could have prevented this. Any of a thing. "You need to kill Nixie. She won't stop here," he requested, no demanded with his dying breath. How were we supposed to kill her? I mean, could we even? The word knock was as ingrained in Scandinavian mythology as folklore that I knew growing up. Could we even do anything? I looked away and then back to Leicester. He was pleading with his eyes for us to stop it, begging me. He raised his hand, I grabbed it, squeezing it as I nodded to him. "Take it easy, we've got it from here." His lips formed to say something, but then they stopped. I watched and I felt the life leave him. As his hand dropped to the floor, I shut his eyes. The best sign of respect I could show to a man who died defending his home. I stood up, gazing at everyone, including the priest who looked at the blood on his hands and then mournfully to me. I then noticed that the gunfire had stopped. "I'll be topside," I said to him. He nodded, walking slowly over to Leicester as I left the cellar silently. Back up top, my team had done their job and done it well. Bodies lined the stairs and lawn, and yet, through the silence, Codfish and Largemouth continued to bicker. "We could have," Codfish said, being cut off by Largemouth, who stepped forward. "Done what? Let them drag us into the swamp. I gave us the early advantage. You should be thanking me." I stepped over each of the bodies. Every single face had a story that ended, a life cut short, a family that was robbed or they were robbed from. I didn't count the dead. I couldn't bring myself to. "Enough," I ordered, all three turning. And Codfish stepped forward. "Are they all right?" I nodded. "Mostly." Codfish and Largemouth shared a look and then back to me. "Leicester?" Largemouth had asked. I slowly shook my head back in response. "Damn," my gunner said, dipping his head. He looked back to me. "Well, what now?" "We need to reconnect with command and bring in a battalion, maybe more. This is out of our depth," Codfish argued. Largemouth laughed and shook his head. "Run, now, and leave everybody in there to be slaughtered." "How many more has this mistaken? How much ammo do you have left? We are a recon element, we have to fall back." Codfish barked again. "When do what? Walk 10 kilometers only to be ambushed in the open." I argued, Codfish looking at me wanting to argue. I didn't give him the chance. They knew that we were here since we stepped foot on the shore. If we leave, it'll be on foot and we'll be ambushed. We know the direction they came from, and right now, we are the only ones that can stop it. They won't stop here. She won't. My team was bathed in silence. Codfish and Largemouth gazing around as Anglerfish stared deadlocked onto my face. "We are the best of the best. There is no one else. We stop her. We have to try." Codfish gave a shaky, unsure exhale as he nodded. "All right, where to?" "Northeast," Anglerfish said, quiet and scanning the direction that they came from. I wasn't sure if it was the wind or something else, but they came from that direction. His words were like molasses, slow and in uneven cadence. "Is something wrong?" I asked, finally addressing him. "Condition. Just want this to be over with," he said, shaking his head with a huff that seemed to spur him out of it. "How are we supposed to kill her anyways? She's some sort of witch," Largemouth asked. "Beings like her are drawn to our side by being tied to an object." A voice caught our attention, the priest. He stepped over the bodies, his eyes unable to gaze at a single one. Before she could only manifest through the mist or the water, faint glances, nothing more. If she's here, it means that somebody brought her here, aided her in passing through. Aided allies, ones that weren't taken by the mist. So, somebody on our side. I said, a half question to which the priest had nodded at. I continued. "Help this thing. Allowed all of this." Once again he nodded. "Very likely." "Why?" Codfish asked the million-crone question. "Oh, I don't know, power. Maybe she gave them something. Either way, she is tied to something, an object to ruin a site. Destroy it and her ties to the side will be severed." I looked at my team, Codfish and Largemouth nodding. The priest departed, wishing us well. "God be with you, son. I must see you to our fallen." Anglerfish said that he knew the way, so we followed him. We didn't know what was coming next, but I don't think anything could have prepared any of us for it. I still think back to that long walk we made through the marsh, one final trek to end this. The fog was stifling, attempting to envelop us at any point had we stopped to do anything. My senses were going haywire between being blinded visually, the silence allowing any twig snap or splash to catch my attention, the cold air mixed with the periodic steps we took through the bog, freezing our legs and shocking our system. Our rifles were raised, scanning whatever we could, preparing for another wave of our people that had been paranormally conscripted to rush us with anything from knives to their bare hands. But nothing came, and I am partially wrong. Anglerfish walked almost the entire way with his weapon down, somewhere in between complacent and in a trance, yet he led us, cognizant enough to make course corrections despite the fact that he seemed to be working off of instinct. In Afghanistan, he helped us track an HVT through rugged mountainous terrain, choosing the best path to maneuver on the fly that saved hours from an already long journey. Despite the paranoia, he had been shoulder to shoulder with us, so I was going to trust him, no matter what. It wasn't until we had reached a dry patch in the marsh, leading to a slight incline, that he called us to a halt. Without looking, he pointed back at me and beckoned me to come forth. I walked over, attempting to make as little noise as possible. The dry terrain made it a pain, but I knelt beside Anglerfish, and that's when everything felt off. First thing is, the fog was much clearer than it had been. Not fully clear, but we could see much farther than we could even at the church. The next was the noise. It was a low tone, and it felt like a small rumble under the ear and wasn't fully there. Like not a noise, but like something was messing with us, enough to cause a small watering of my eyes, but not much else. I checked my watch. 1:35. The moon was at its highest, and even if not much light was getting through the fog, this was about as much ambient light as we were going to get. We would need every advantage that we could scrape up for what came next. I remember the area ahead so vividly. The ground was at an incline just slightly for maybe 50 meters or so for a clearing, and then a single line of trees that was unmistakably a slope or a cliff. The fog got more and more dispersed, only seeming to come back into its fullest a good ways away. I realized then that Anglerfish had led us exactly to where we needed to go, the epicenter of this, the eye of the storm. I patted my marksman on the shoulder, thanking him in a breathless whisper to minimize the amount of noise. He didn't respond. I thought it was only him keeping watch. I signaled for the rest of the team to collapse in. Codfish and Largemouth quickly formed up, all of us trying to keep quiet. I motioned for our headsets. Everybody had one.
A radio check, now me.
I asked. They nodded, Codfish chiming in.
A bit fuzzy, but I can read you.
We got low to the ground, holding my rifle by its front sling swivel. I crawled forward, the rest of my team following close behind. The goal was to keep as low of a silhouette as possible, a good thing too because as we drew near, the radios crackled and I heard Largemouth say,
I'm hearing voices to our 12 and 10.
He was right. Voices could be heard, muttering, conversing. Whether they were human or not remained to be determined. However, we approached the slope all the same, arriving at the tree line like the four-eyed demons of NATO that we were. And what laid before us? It's clear to me now that monsters exist, not metaphorical but literal, real demons that have been around for longer than single-cell organisms have existed. Some beyond our comprehension that wears on my mind and deprives me of rest at night. That being said, some of humanity is not that far behind. Before us laid a large clearing in the middle of a circular ditch or a crater. Whether naturally made or artificial still isn't known to me. The forest floor stretched down the slopes and merged with a strange granite brick-like surface that dipped and sunk at random points, probably due to age and erosion. The center point of it was covered in a small puddle, no deeper than a couple of centimeters, and in the middle of that laid a large, crude stone table. Lining the edge of the puddle and the surface of the table were ruins of the elder Futhark. I knew them well, the last remnants of true paganism in the world that hadn't been burned away by inquisitions or crusades. They made up lines, shapes, and phrases that I will never know what they said. And then, others I didn't know of at the time, but after some research, I found out to be Wiccan iconography, moon, stars, druid swirls, and eyes, a lot of eyes. Some were written in a white paint-like mixture, mostly the ones that lined the outside of the puddle. However, the ones on the table, it was dried, no heat being given off, but from my long military career, I knew the sight of blood when I saw it.
This is a ritual site.
Codfish muttered over the comms. And then the people, those vile monsters. Some were more of the disappeared, lining the edges of the slopes, their numbers obviously having dwindled since their assault on the church. Others were, I can only describe them as cultists, old-style garb not found in this land, no matter how far you look back, dressed in grays, whites, and blacks. A sort of one-piece cloak, yet segmented into proper sleeves and pant legs. The worst part was all of them wore masks. At least I hoped they were masks. Deer heads, extremely realistic, almost if they had been hollowed out and taxidermied, donned the heads of every single one of the cultists. There were at least a dozen. Some carried axes dried with red iron, others knives or glaives. Right then and there, I was measuring our options. We had better firepower, but they had numbers, and we were far too close right now. And even with the safety of the church, they still swarmed the outside, only being held back by stone walls. We would need to successfully get the jump on them if we were going to make it out of this. My planning was broken up when I heard yells and shouts come from our 9 o'clock, drawing closer. The cultists seemed unsurprised, and I soon found out why. Those on the outside of the circle parted, allowing 2 of the cultists to enter, one of the officers from the chapel in tow. We had lost him during the fray, and it seemed as if their raid hadn't been a total waste. The policeman was unarmed, his gear stripped away as he was forcibly dragged onto the stone, kicking and screaming even as cuts and bruises lined his head. I still remember his resistance. No, get the hell off of me. We should have done something then and there, but I knew that we needed more info. It's sickening to think about now, but I think I wanted to draw Nixie out, hoping that we could confirm if this was the anchor to destroy or not. I hope wherever that officer is, he can forgive me, and if his family is reading this, I am so sorry. He was held down while 2 cultists to a limb as his head thrashed around. A lead cultist standing at one of the ends, and it began muttering. It sounded incomprehensible, like it had syllables, and it was definitely a language. But I have heard every single form of linguistic while traveling the world. English, Spanish, Norwegian, Danish, Swedish, Finnish, Polish, Arabic, Cantonese, everything. I have and still have never heard anything like what he was saying. And then, from the pond, spindly arms, black and smooth like obsidian, emerged from the area above his head. Impossibly so, I don't know how, but they hovered above his face for a moment and began to tear into him. His scream shook me into action as I hopped on our frequency. Time to move, we need that destroyed. I looked at Largemouth. And get to a good angle, you'll have to be our base of fire. We're gonna need half of that group gone in the first few seconds.
Will do,
he said. Sliding over several meters, he got to a clear gap between the trees, setting up his MG3's bipod and readying for a fresh bout. Codfish slid over, checking his vest, saying,
Some thermite will burn right through there, but we'll need to place it manually.
This wasn't going to be easy. Nothing that we could do could be done before we took out the bulk of the enemy force. I contemplated the steps carefully when anglerfish drew me from my thought.
She's here.
I flipped back onto my stomach and then took a knee. God. A head rose up from the pond, following the arms as they peeled away flesh and muscle. He still continued to scream even as his body was being picked apart. The hair on her head was spindly, looking like a bundle of twigs and fur that had sat in the marsh for several thousands of years. Her face was almost entirely obscured except for a set of eyes. Those eyes, they were bright gold. A glow that seemed unnatural. I don't know how to explain it. Almost as if the light itself wasn't illuminating them but some other force. It was consuming and deteriorating. I had to force my eyes shut. You got a shot? I asked Angler. No response. I looked back up as Nixie was fleeing back into the water, dragging the man into her makeshift puddle portal as his screams became smothered by the water. Angler, I grumbled, trying my best not to yell despite everything in me wanting to. He finally answered.
Yes.
Take it.
Sorry.
Over the course of mere milliseconds, I contemplated what he meant. I got my answer when the snap of his suppressor echoed, firing a shot into my back. It was only by the grace of God that my backplate and soft armor held up, just barely. I found out later these 7.62 NATO round punctured dang near the whole way through my plate. He was close and it cracked several of my ribs near my spine on impact. The force of it sent me straight into the ground. My rifle caught between me and the dirt, my nose smashing into the rail of my rifle as my face got a taste of soil and blood. And then my lung fought for lives as I coughed, heaving air as I tried to catch my breath. I thought that I was dying. I felt like I was dying. I didn't know what was happening. My gloves dug into the ground, flipping me onto my back. Through my night vision, partially smeared with dirt, I saw Angler flip up his nods. God. His eyes, just like the ones at the church, just like those around the circle, they glowed, milky white as can be as he stared down at me emotionlessly. Largemouth cried out in rage. Grabbing his MG3, he tried to spin around and return fire at Angler, only for our former marksman to draw his pistol and double-tap my gunner in the chest. He was much further away and the caliber was smaller. He made it out better than I had, but it still caught Largemouth by surprise. He slipped back against the tree, gun falling awkwardly on top of him. I remember another violent coughing fit trying to get my bearings as Anglerfish must have noticed that I was still alive. He aimed his pistol at me and I stared down at the barrel prepared to meet my fate at the hands of one of my own team, now turned unwilling traitor. That was until a series of shots were fired off. One threaded the needle through the side of his headset, through his head, and out the other side in an explosion of gore and plastic. Another grazed the back of his neck below his helmet, and a third through his neck. Angler dropped lifelessly, his handgun bouncing off the ground as the weight of his nods forced his head to roll towards me. I saw his face, the color bleeding out as the glow in his eyes faded, and returned back to normal. Codfish stepped forward, smoke exiting his suppressor as he scanned the area, Largemouth recovering as he fought to his feet. My comms man attempted to come to my aid, However, the nightmare scenario occurred as our enemies ascended the slope and attacked us. We were now caught off guard. I don't know if she planned it. That witch. A horde of disappeared, headed towards Codfish, whose rifle quickly snapped to level and started to fire off shots. It was strange to see. Tight shot groups firing off, dropping them left and right. A violent crowd control as he was forced to back up. Not long after, a burst of machine gun fire shook the forest as Largemouth staggered to his feet. They were too late to help me, however, as I found myself being dragged down the hill. 2 cultists grabbed onto my combat shirt and pulled me down using gravity to aid them. I tried fighting back, but I was winded and in no condition to fight. But damned I did. With my right hand, I grabbed the one on my right side by the neck, causing him to panic. As the left one attempted to adjust, I instead leaned back, allowing my knee to connect to his strange deer head. It didn't feel like it was hollow. In fact, thinking back now, it felt real. Regardless, we tumbled down the rest of the slope in a mess. I tried scrambling to my feet, but a pain from deep within my chest shocked me enough to be stuck at the knee. I was tackled to the ground by one of the disappeared, straight onto my back. My ribs howled in pain as I found my attacker sitting on top of me. Brows furrowed as enraged glowing eyes stared down at me, as it grabbed me by my helmet and tried pulling it off. My holster was trapped beneath one of its legs, so instead, I grabbed it by whatever jacket it was wearing and pulled it down towards me, headbutting it. It seemed to stagger it enough that I could get it rolled off, but before long the cultists had descended on me again. Grabbing me by one of my legs, I was dragged onto the pool of water, as a female came from the direction of my head and drove a small dagger into my left shoulder. It was caught partially, stopped by the shoulder strap on my vest and my shirt, but damn if it didn't hurt. I screamed in agony, my left arm incapacitated as my right arm felt around, at my free holster. I drew my Glock 17, wasting no time as my finger felt purchase on the trigger and aimed it around. The shots were sporadic and panicked, but even then I thanked the years of time that I spent honing my skills. The cultist that had dragged me by the leg was hit directly in its neck, dropping down, as I fired at 2 more, catching them center of mass. Trying my best to ward them off, I wanted to say that I screamed something akin to, "Damn you all." It could have been slurred gibberish, but the point was clear. A wounded lion was still a lion. I felt like I had stabilized my situation only slightly, until the obsidian hands had returned. One shot up from my right side, grabbing my gun hand and squeezing it. It didn't hurt, in fact I barely felt it, but all control of my weapon ceased as my weapon fell to the wet ground. The other shot straight for my throat, silencing my yells as I was pulled to a sitting position, forced to watch as I came face to face with Nixie. I still didn't get a full proper look. My eyes were stinging with both my sweat and blood. Dirt and now mud smeared the lenses of my night vision goggles. But those eyes. From beneath a layer of matted hair and wretched twigs that layered the top of her head, they glowed like spotlights, unblinking and unflinching, hypnotizing me, ordering me to stand down and allow myself to be dragged in. My blood slowed as I felt the cold become uncomfortable. I forgot the pain, I forgot the adrenaline, I forgot who I was. That was until a boot kicked her head, sending her back into whatever hell she crawled from with an audible splash. I regained all feeling as my hand shook, pain shooting through my shoulder as I gazed around. Largemouth staggered forward, positioning himself in front of me as he hip-fired his MG3. The belt laid at his side almost emptied as he fired off, forcing the cultist back and cutting down more and more thralls. I felt a hand at my carry handle causing me to flail my good arm, only to see that it was Codfish. He had grabbed me by my plate carrier's carry handle and was dragging me out of the puddle and onto the slope. I looked back at Largefish, who had pushed our enemies a considerable distance back. And then his belt went dry and he saw this and then turned to join us and stopped. I wanted to yell, I wanted to rush to his aid to save my machine gunner, but I couldn't. A knife found itself buried deep in his stomach as he stopped, breath stolen as his mouth was agape. He looked down. A child, one of those that the former police chief had mentioned, stared back up at him with glowing eyes. It backed off and he staggered forward. Another child rounded the side of the table and buried a blade into his side, forcing him to drop to his knees. His MG3 hit the ground as his arm shook. He was fighting back the urge to enter into shock. He reached down and drew his pistol, the weapon shaking as he muttered under his breath when coming face to face with the children. And then they closed in. The cultists had reformed with what was left of their thralls, forming a circle as they descended upon him. Through a gap in the formation, we made eye contact. His breathing was shaky and uncertain, but he nodded to me. It wasn't a request. There was nothing that I could do to stop him. It was an honor. I nodded in return. He had been by my side for 2 continents and several dozen missions. He deserved all of the respect in that moment. The obsidian arms emerged from the pool, grasping his shoulders as Nixie's head returned, and knowing that he was right next to the ritual site's epicenter, reached for the 2 M67 hand grenades mounted on his vest. We have to, I sputtered to Codfish, grabbing onto him for support. He tried to protest. No, And then he surveyed the scene and took off, dragging me with him as both of us raced up and over the slope. The last thing I remembered when I looked back was Largemouth staring defiantly into that damn beast's eyes as he let the spoonless grenades drop to the ground. After a few seconds of running, we dropped to the ground. The explosion of the grenades shook the earth and sky. Shrapnel soared through the air, cutting through bark, leaves, and branches, destroying anything in its path. A follow-up rumble greater than anything they could have produced rocked the ground beneath us as for the first time, wind entered the area around us. Codfish placed his arm over me, hoping to possibly shield me as we remained there, unsure of what was next. And then, nothing. Silence was all that we had as my eyes clenched shut, sure that we had failed and would be dragged off back to her. However, nothing, and then the sounds of the forest returned. In my haze of pain, I didn't notice at first, however Codfish did, rising to his feet and gazing around. "Oh, we did it," he muttered, a gust of wind blowing leaves past me as he laughed exhaustedly, and then quickly knelt beside me as he flipped me over. It was left side first, right on my bad arm. Dang that frickin' Radiohead. I jest, if it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here typing this out. He quickly checked my wound, popping open the IFAK mounted to my belt as he scanned around and shouted into his headset. "This is Element Romeo, any station on net, radio check." After a few seconds of silence, we were graced by the best sound all night.
Element Romeo, this is Maine, requesting status.
He didn't give them a chance to request shit. Last thing I heard as I drifted off was him shouting into the headset. "The situation secured, possibly. Requesting channel for immediate 9-line. Precedence is urgent."
Roger, Element Romeo. Bird is on standby. Roll 2 is prepared.
Good, standby 4. Shit, stay with me, Kraken. The kind of slumber I experienced is strange. You feel the seconds, minutes, days roll by, but you don't at the same time. I thought it was the afterlife, floating weightless in half-consciousness. However, I was wrong. I awoke a week later at a hospital in Copenhagen. The first person to greet me was my CO, who, although looked exhausted, was relieved that I had returned to the land of the living. Codfish had given him a full sit rep, and although he was very scrutinizing of it, knew something was amiss when his report matched the findings of many of the villagers and the priest. They had no idea 2 firefights had occurred and only came in with a full force when the explosions of the grenades were detected by an infantry unit to the perimeter. Largemouth and anglerfish had been listed as MIA, a fact that has burned me up inside to no end. However, the Royal Navy believed it was easier than attempting to create a false scenario of some of its best operatives dying overseas. The site was gone, almost completely wiped off the earth, and the bodies in the disappeared couldn't be found, despite Marines and Home Guard performing several searches of the entire grid square. My CO still doesn't believe that it was Nixie, but I know better. The revelation of this cult had him shaken as he left. We've dealt with all sorts of extremist cells and terrorism over 2 decades, but this was different, and if they could attempt something like this, what else were they capable of? 2 of my men are dead. Codfish has been moved to another team, and I don't even know if they'll ever let me lead an element again. I hope it was worth it. I've been recovering ever since then, and even now, months later, those piercing yellow eyes still haunt me, asking me to return to that swamp, to her. It's taken every ounce of effort that I've got, but I've staved it off, for now. I don't know what comes next, but this isn't the end. We were under attack once, and I will probably be soon again. For whatever it's worth, stay safe, please. A man in dark sunglasses, wearing an expensive black suit and carrying a fine Italian suitcase, strode purposefully towards me. I could smell the Givenchy cologne radiating off of him before he reached me. The sun shone directly in my eyes as I stared at him, wondering where this would lead. "Hello, soldier," he said, shaking my hand with an iron grip. I saw his freshly cut hair and the slight bulge under his shoulder where he kept his pistol. The thought came rushing into my head. Unbidden. Looks like a fad. "Good afternoon, sir," I said, saluting him briskly. He swatted away the gesture. "You don't need to do that," he said. "In fact, you may be done saluting and polishing boots forever, soldier. I have a potential job offer for you if we could speak in private." "What's your name?" I asked. "Agent Stryker," he said. "And I already know yours, Sergeant Toads." I looked into his mirrored shades, wondering what hid behind them. "I have a job for you, a real God-honest career. You could be done with the Marines today if you wanted." He looked over to the administrative building, the clear glass doors opening and closing as people came and went. He looked back at me, putting his hand on my shoulder in a fatherly way. "So, will you listen?" "Yes, sir," I said, and we walked into the admin building. The blast of cold air conditioning feeling like a drink of water after wandering around the desert all day. He found a small, unoccupied office marked conference room and motioned me inside, closing the door behind us. I sat down in the small, poorly padded chair on one side of the wooden desk, and he took the large, leather one across from me. From my vantage point, I could still see outside. Marines passed back and forth on their way to whatever duties they needed to carry out, and support personnel came and went from the admin building and the medical ward across the street. They reminded me of ants, constantly rushing forwards for the good of the hive. From far away, the lines of soldiers even looked like ants. "So," Agent Stryker began slowly. "Sergeant Jintao Toads, we finally meet." He said my name slowly, as if tasting its syllables, pondering what it could mean. "You certainly are an adept soldier. You graduated in the top 5% of your class from boot camp, and your IQ test shows that you're in the top 1% of the American population. You have a bachelor's degree from UConn and also graduated at the top of your class there. Moreover, you have joined South Korean and American citizenship." I nodded at this, unsurprised. This was a man who did his research. "You speak fluent Korean?" "Yes," I said, nodding. "I speak Korean and English. I grew up with both of them." "Oh, great," he said, clapping his hands together excitedly. "You are exactly what we need. I'm recruiting from the CIA, and we need someone experienced and competent, somebody who speaks the language and understands the culture. Would this mission fit you, soldier? What do you think?" I don't know," I said truthfully. It felt like this entire encounter had come out of nowhere. It had an unreal quality to it. I couldn't believe the CIA actually had interest in me. "You won't be alone," he said quickly. "We have another more experienced agent who would accompany you." I just stayed quiet. He pulled out a contract showing me a paragraph marked with a handwritten star. "This is a one-time offer, Sergeant Toads. Either assign now or you will never see us again." He pointed at the marked paragraph. I grabbed the contract, spinning it around and quickly reading it. The section that he had marked discussed compensation. $70K a year plus hazard pay as well as potential bonuses for dangerous assignments. This was far more than my salary as a sergeant for the Marines, which was laughably small. "Okay, fine, I'm in," I said, smiling slightly. I shakily rose from my seat and he did the same, extending his hand. We shook and suddenly the future seemed bright, exciting, even limitless. I had 18 months of training after that and then assumed the title of Agent Toads and Operations Officer for the company. My new partner, a gruff man with a thick southern accent, didn't speak much or reveal anything about his past. For my first assignment, I was told to go to a small office on the topmost floor of the building. I walked in, seeing a man standing there next to a desk, a file in hand. I looked him up and down, seeing a muscular gym rat with blue eyes, a tan complexion, and very dark hair. He didn't smile, his stony face just observing, seemingly seeing everything. In his black suit, standing 6'3", he made an imposing figure. "I'm Agent Toad, sir," I said, stepping forward to shake his hand. He quickly looked away, pretending to not notice it, and I put it down. "Yeah, I know who you are," he said, and cut the sir crap. "My name is Agent Hudson, or Mark. Since we'll probably be killing people together, I assume we should start on a first-name basis, right? Jin Tao." A slight smile crossed his lips, a smile that didn't reach his cold and blue eyes. He had the eyes of an executioner. A shiver ran down my spine, and I felt suddenly glad that this man was on my side. "This here is our first assignment. Oh, it should be easy for a young hotshot like you." He pushed the folder into my chest hard. I grabbed it, and he started walking out of the room. "Where do we meet?" I asked. He didn't even turn his head. 6 a.m., a car will be sent to your apartment. After that, maybe we'll meet in hell, I don't know." He laughed at his own joke, slamming the door behind him. I pulled the rolling chair back from the desk, putting the folder down. First, I went to the break room and made myself a cup of green tea, using lots of Gyokuro leaves from Japan. Carrying the cup back to the office room, the fragrant steam rising from the cup, I thought of all the possibilities in that folder. It could be a mission to go to the rainforests of Central America, or the jungles of Cambodia, or the vast forests of Siberia. I opened the first page, my heart beating fast in my chest. I read through the preliminary report quickly, feeling a sense of disappointment. We were to go to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, more commonly called North Korea. The orders said Mark and I would travel to a biological and chemical weapons facility near the Chinese border, find out as much information as we could, and travel back to the rendezvous point. It was fairly short on details from there, and I figured that I would find out more when the time came. I went back home, eating a big meal and getting some sleep, setting my alarm early so that I could shower and shave before the CIA car whisked me away, bringing me to new and exciting places. I dreamed that night of endless tundras and open oceans, and forests filled with wonder. The car showed up at exactly 6 a.m. I saw Agent Hudson sitting in the passenger seat. An older man, probably in his 60s, sat behind the wheel. I had never seen him before, so I got in the back seat. The smell of cologne and air freshener filled the car, a pleasant combination like vanilla and flowers. I looked at the older man in the rearview mirror. He smiled at me, his dark eyes meeting mine. He stared at me for a long moment. "Agent Stryker recruited you, huh?" he asked, more of a statement than a question. I nodded. "He's a good man, that Stryker. He recruited me too all those years ago. My name's Al, by the way. I'm semi-retired, but I still drive for the company," he said, using the informal name for the CIA. A lot of people who worked for it simply called it the company or the agency. assuming everybody would know exactly what agency they meant. "It's nice to meet you, Al," I said, feeling tired. I had taken a caffeine pill and some ginseng supplements just before I left, but the combination hadn't kicked in yet. I looked up at Mark, who stared out the passenger side window, not speaking. "Is this your first time in the DPRK?" Al asked. I nodded. "Boy, some crazy stuff goes down in that country. My dad was in the Korean War. Have you ever heard of Gwishin?" I had heard the term, but I didn't really know anything about it. No, I grew up in the USA, but I speak Korean. My family taught it to me, but I don't really know the urban legends," I said. His eyes narrowed as he drove down the highway towards the military airport. "This is no urban legend," he said cryptically. "The Gwishin is real. My dad actually saw one when he was on guard duty. Said that he was alone in the watchtower. Their company had taken heavy losses. He usually had 2 people on guard duty, but until reinforcements arrived, he had to do it alone. He mostly just chain-smoked cigarettes and drank coffee," he said. "Nothing ever really happened. And then one night something finally did, and it wasn't North Korea behind it." He said that he saw women walking out of the trees, each of them in a white funeral gown. They had stringy black hair covering their faces, and he couldn't see their eyes. He didn't even know how they saw to move forward. Their hair went all the way down past their chests, and they seemed, well, strange and human even. He called out in broken Korean, telling them that this was a military outpost and that they needed to turn around immediately. They just kept on walking, going faster and faster now, their movements jerky and unnatural. He knew something was wrong, and he called for backup, turned off the safety on his gun, and started to aim. He called out again, telling them that he would be forced to fire if they didn't stop immediately. They started running towards the guard tower then, a dozen of them, and as they ran, the wind blew the hair back from their faces. He saw that they had skulls beneath, grinning, bloody skulls with pieces of rotted flesh still hanging off. They were barefoot, and he saw the bones in their feet from where the skin and muscle had worn away. It was eerie how they jerked and limped at such superhuman speeds, he said. So he opened fire, but they had reached the ladder of the guard tower. He shot a few, but they just kept on coming, twisting their bodies unnaturally, dark blood staining their white gowns a black color. You could see straight through some of them where the bullets had torn through their arms or legs, but they seemed to feel no pain. He started to pray, and he saw rotted pale hands reaching up from the ladder to the guard tower. So without thinking, he jumped. A fairly long fall, he said, but he rolled and only ended up breaking 3 fingers in his arm and spraining his ankle. In immense pain, he tried to run as fast as he could, and then the reinforcements had arrived. By the time they got to the tower, they found only trails of dark, clotted blood, and some stringy black hair still on the deck, right where my father had been. He stopped talking, taking the exit to the airport. The silence in the car seemed deafening. He pulled up to the gate, showing his identification. The security guard let the gate rise and radioed something from his post. Soon we were pulling up to the jet, and Al was waving goodbye to Agent Hudson and me. "Good luck, new blood," he said to me. "And remember, my story wasn't some campfire make-believe. There actually are things in those woods and in that country that aren't normal. And with all their biological and chemical weapons research, it may be much, much worse now." And with that, he put his window up, turning the car around and driving away. A blur of black trim and squealing tires shining under the hot summer sun. On the flight over to China, Agent Hudson and I discussed the plan. We would sneak in through the relatively porous Chinese-North Korean border at the exact time when the guards were being changed. We had about a 5-minute window where the departing guard would brief the arriving guard in the station watchtower before coming back out. Moreover, we would be armed with various weapons, in addition to the Glock 30 that I always carried in my shoulder holster under my suit. On the plane, we had 2 Heckler & Koch HK-416 rifles equipped with both fully automatic and semi-automatic switches. We had pre-filled magazines with dum-dums, special bullets that would expand upon impact and create catastrophic tissue injuries in any enemies that we encountered. In addition, we had grenades, lots of round, blue M67s that would fragment and explode across an area 40 feet wide. And we had 2 very small guns with special needles filled with atorphine, a quick-acting opioid usually used to sedate elephants or large mammals that would instantly put down any normal human. We also had opioid antagonists so that the person wouldn't stop breathing after receiving it. If we found any North Korean scientists or high-ranking officials and we thought that we could take them out alive, we were supposed to try using the tranquilizer gun, though this was a secondary priority. If we could get them close to the border, then a few auxiliary agents would be in place to grab the hostage from us. The North Korean border guard could be killed if the hostage was deemed valuable enough. This was all off the books, and if we were captured and tortured, the US would immediately deny any involvement or knowledge, and say that we were lone wolves or mercenaries. Before we knew it, we were landing in China in an airfield surrounded by lush trees. A Chinese driver who didn't speak a lick of English was there waiting. He took off quickly. I looked back at the sleek metal jet, wondering if I would ever see it again. He dropped us off seemingly in the middle of nowhere. We were on a deserted dirt road with deep potholes and large stones scattered all over. Next to us, a thick, dark green forest loomed, rising up into the mountains that stood like watching giants overhead. I knew somewhere in that mountain range the border between China and North Korea stood, and then our mission and the killing would begin. Though this happened 2 months ago, I still remember the eerie sensation that crawled over me then, as if my intuition knew of the horrors that I would encounter that day. We had changed into camouflage suits before leaving the plane. The patches on the cloth, shades of black, green, and dark green, were designed to match the flora in this region. Without hesitation, Agent Hudson began to tramp off into the woods, leaving the dirt trail behind. We didn't talk on the walk. He checked an electronic compass in his pocket, seemingly adept at reading the bizarre, constantly changing numbers on the screen. He would occasionally stop behind a tree, pull out the electronic compass, and then slightly change paths again. Soon I saw a small clearing with a watchtower up ahead. Looking to my left and right from our vantage point high in the mountains, I saw more watchtowers peeking up from the North Korean terrain. They went on as far as the eye could see, spaced out in the thick forest, their tops rising above the trees like snake heads rising out of a pit. "This here is the crossing point," he whispered, "and be ready for anything." I nodded grimly and we walked forward. I took out my binoculars and I saw the shape of a man on top of the tower. I was about to motion to Agent Hudson, but he had already seen it. He peered through his binoculars, frowning. "Should we cross if there's still somebody up there?" I asked. I thought this was supposed to be the changing of the guard. He looked at me strangely. "Look again," he whispered. I took out my binoculars and really inspected the figure, though in the dying light of the day it was hard to make out details. But after 5 or 6 seconds, I had seen and realized enough. The man wearing a North Korean military uniform had been crucified against the watchtower, his eyes cut out and his skin peeled off. Someone must have skinned him alive and then put the uniform back on his body. We walked forward slowly, our rifles raised. Soon we reached the watchtower and found no one around it. We walked slowly up the stairs, making as little noise as possible, expecting an ambush. I came to the top of the tower and found the man's corpse, with thick nails driven through his wrists and ankles. He hung from the wall around the topmost room of the tower, his head drooping. I saw letters written behind him in Korean, thick lines of black paint. And I looked and beheld a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and Hell followed with him. "That'll be the Book of Revelation," Agent Hudson started to say when the corpse twisted violently and inhaled. The muscles on his skinned body writhed as it pulled against the nails, sending thick gouts of blood streaming down from his body. Snapping its teeth, its lipless mouth opening and closing with loud clacking sounds, it tried to lunge at me. Instinctively, I backed away, but the nails driven deep into the thick wood had kept the corpse attached. "Oh God," I whispered, pulling up my pistol and pointing it at the head of the riding body. "No," Agent Hudson said, his voice fierce and commanding. "Don't you fire any guns unless necessary. The sound could draw attention. It could draw the whole dang North Korean military. Just leave it there. We have a mission after all." My head seemed to clear and I put the pistol away. We walked back into the tower and started descending the stairs, the corpse still gnashing and snapping its teeth at the air as we left. Our plan was to go straight to the biological weapons laboratory after moving through the Chinese-North Korean border. But our plans went quickly awry when dozens of North Korean soldiers ran by in their brownish-gray uniforms. We were coming out of the watchtower and thankfully we were far higher up in the mountains than these soldiers, winding their way up the dirt road below. They only had one car and the rest tried to run next to it. The car billowed out black smoke and gave the entire surrounding area a smell of burning and sulfur. All the soldiers that I could see were extremely thin with sunken eyes and prominent cheekbones. They looked like they hadn't seen a good meal in years, and since this was North Korea, they probably hadn't. But they still were armed and far outnumbered us. We were supposed to use stealth to complete the mission, not raw force. A North Korean informant had given us the code to enter the biological weapons facility, and we would be entering at the slowest time of the day, when the fewest staff members were present. We would still have to kill any guards that we encountered, however. "Change of plans," Agent Hudson said, pointing to a deer trail that wound in the opposite direction of the approaching North Korean troops. "There's a small border town nearby where we can hide temporarily, until the military clears off the road." "There's no other way?" I asked. He shrugged. Not that I know of," he said. "Our planned route follows that road. We could lay low for a couple of hours and then come back and check out the area. Try not to be seen by any civilians, though. They're all spies for the regime. These people turn in their own neighbors for an extra bowl of rice. Heck, half of them are eating snakes and rats and grass just to survive. They probably earn 1,000 a year at most. They would bring us right to the torture chamber if they caught sight of us." "Yeah, I figured," I said. "So are we just not going to talk about what we saw back there?" Agent Hudson stopped suddenly, giving me a severe look. His blue eyes looked me up and down coldly. "Okay, then talk about it," he said. The statement caught me off guard. I didn't know how to respond to it. "Well, I mean, you have more experience than me. I was wondering what you thought," I said. The trees around us rustled in the slight mountain breeze, the air smelling sweet and clean. I looked past Agent Hudson and could see for dozens of miles into the North Korean countryside. Quaint small villages dotted the landscape, with dirt roads snaking their way through the thick trees. Far off in the distance from the direction of the watchtower, we heard yelling, and from a different direction, dogs had started barking. "Oh, crap," Agent Hudson said. "Let's pick up the pace. They have tracking dogs, I think. I don't know if they'll pick up our scent and follow us, or whether they'll catch the trail of whoever actually did that horrible crap. Skinning that man alive and all that. But our trail is fresh, so I'm not liking our odds." He began to speed walk, pulling out the electric compass and reading it as he went. From our view high up on the mountain, I could see a little town not far away. Agent Hudson did too, and he quickly pocketed the electric compass. "Okay, I know where we are," he said. "I don't need that anymore." "So, are you going to answer my question?" I asked. He walked fast beside me, breathing hard, a slight sheen of perspiration showing on his face. "I don't have an answer for you, Jintao," he said calmly. "Do I think I know everything strange and unusual that we'll encounter just because I've been in this job for a few years? But no, I don't think that's what's going on. I've never seen anything like that before, and I hope for both our sakes that we never see it again." "What do you think about what Al said? About biological and chemical weapons?" I said. "Do you think maybe they tested out some new agent and it got out?" "I think the most likely answer is that the man we saw wasn't actually dead. He might have looked dead when we first got there, but I've seen lots of people who looked dead and weren't. Even being skinned alive, you can live for a while. Maybe he was in a stupor or catatonic state from all the pain and shock that he must have suffered. Maybe they gave that soldier some drug or chemical agent so he wouldn't feel pain, but it's not like we saw Lazarus rising out of the grave. In my book, all we saw was a dying, crazed man nailed to the wall. He stopped speaking, the dog sounding much closer now. We had almost made it to the village. It looked fairly empty, though I saw a feral-looking, extremely skinny cat skulking around a nearby residence. As we entered the town, I realized just how dilapidated and shoddy the small houses and huts here looked. The one on the edge of the forest with the cat in the yard literally had holes in the roof, and the windows were broken and covered over with paper. No power lines ran to any of the houses. I thought to myself how cold and miserable the winters must be here, without electricity or central heating. As if on cue, an old woman came hobbling out of the house, stooping down to pet the cat. She looked tiny, no more than 5 feet, and had an old-fashioned red satin dress covering her thin and shaking frame. She looked up at us with bleary eyes, the whites looking like yellow jelly. She had a hunched back look, and took small, tottering steps as she leaned heavily on her wooden cane. After staring at us in surprise for a few long moments, she smiled, showing her few remaining teeth, spread out in her mouth like lone sentries scattered across a war zone. "Are you with the tour group?" she asked in Korean, and I immediately answered, smiling. "Yes, we got separated, I'm afraid," I said. She gave me a suspicious look and then she motioned for me to come inside the house. "Oh, well, come in. I'll get you food and water. Maybe we can find a way to get you back to your group." "That'd be wonderful," I said. Agent Hudson understood some Korean but not much. I translated the conversation for him and he grunted in assent. "I'm not eating any of this dang Korean food," he said. "It's probably all cats and dogs. Did you know the North Korean government put up posters all around the towns saying to eat dog meat in the summertime because it cools you down? In reality, they just wanted free food for their people, and slaughtering wild dogs is one more way to give it." I followed the old woman through the battered, cracked front door of the house. Inside, I saw a home that only someone in extreme poverty could love. A dirty, chipped table stood in the middle of the kitchen. A fire roared in the collapsing fireplace. Most of the bricks that composed it were either loose, fractured, or missing entirely. Above the fire, I saw a black metal pot. There was an odor of rotting wood and mold. I also smelled something strange coming from the pot, a smell almost like green tea. I walked over and looked in, inhaling it deeply. In the boiling water, I saw only grass clippings and a dead snake, being cooked together for a disgusting broth. I looked up sharply at the woman who didn't seem to notice my revulsion. "You eat this?" I asked the old woman, who smiled wanly. "Oh, when we can catch snakes or rats to eat, we do," she replied. "Otherwise, it's just grass and rotten cabbage from the government, along with powdered milk sometimes or rice. But you can't count on the rations coming in. They've been cut and then cut again until we feel constantly hungry." "What's your name?" I asked. "Hee-jin," she said, bowing curtly. I wondered whether this woman was a friend or a liability. I certainly didn't want to kill her, and I also didn't want to risk her running out to inform the authorities of our presence immediately after we left. I could see these same thoughts passing through Agent Hudson's mind, his face turning stony as he looked down at her. "I'm Jin Tao and this is Mark," I said, purposefully not giving her our full names. "Have you seen anything strange around here lately? We found a corpse in the woods that appeared to be not fully dead." Her eyes widened at this and she uttered a short gasp. "We had that during the arduous march, the famine that killed millions," she said. "Some of the people who starved came back and they were rabid, biting, and totally insane. Nothing was left of their humanity. They were just agents of hunger who went around eating the living." "And what about the line?" And I looked and beheld a pale horse. "Have you ever heard that before?" I asked. She broke eye contact, looking down and to the left, hesitating for a long moment. No, I'm sorry," she said. In North Korea, Bibles could get you a death sentence or life in a concentration camp, so I doubted if she would have known the reference anyway. But something in her demeanor suggested that she knew more than she had said. I wondered if this was just a paranoia from the stressful situation, or whether I was actually seeing it. As I relayed the conversation to Agent Hudson in full, I heard dogs barking outside and men calling orders. The heavy thud of many booted feet echoed from the dirt road through the village, and it seemed to be growing nearer by the second. Before I knew what was happening, I saw Agent Hudson take out his tranquilizer gun and shoot a dart into her stomach. She looked down confused and then frowned. With seconds, she began to wave around her feet. "Oh," she said, falling. Agent Hudson scooped her up in his arms as the knocks came from the front door, loud and insistent. Soldiers yelled in North Korean, stating that enemy agents had infiltrated the area and that a search was underway. Agent Hudson ran to the bedroom, throwing the woman down on the threadbare mattress. I heard crashing from the front and back of the house, and heavy boots began to thud on the wooden floors. Without thinking, Agent Hudson and I took refuge in a closet in the bedroom, shutting the door quietly behind us though, leaving a slit to see outside. Then we waited for the men to come in and discover us with guns drawn and take us to the torture chamber. I heard the soldiers sweeping the house from room to room, dogs furiously barking outside. A car that sounded like its muffler had fallen off sometime during the Vietnam War idled in the street. They found the old woman laying comatose in her bed and tried unsuccessfully to rouse her, screaming orders at her over and over but with no response. I heard footsteps coming towards the door of the closet where we hid, and my finger tightened on the trigger. I was resolved to go down fighting and not be captured and given a slow death on a blood-stained concrete slab in the basement of some building where the townspeople never go. I saw Agent Hudson's eyes narrow, the scope of the gun raised to chest height as he prepared to start shooting. The air felt electric with tension, and I tried not to even breathe too loudly lest we be heard. My heart beat furiously in my ears, each thud seeming to betray my presence to the enemy. I tried to calm myself to stop the trembling that swept across my body. But then a commotion started on the street, and the soldiers began issuing orders and rushing outside. Firing started and screams of agony and horror shattered the small, poverty-stricken town. I slowly opened the door expecting some sort of trap, but the shrieking and wails coming from outside could not have been staged. There was too much pain in the voice, intolerable. It sounded like their vocal cords would rupture from the effort, and then the screams were cut off one by one. I walked softly to the window, seeing Hee-jin still laying in the bed unconscious. I would have to give her a dose of an opioid antagonist to prevent a likely overdose that would cause her to stop breathing and turn blue. For drugs like Itorphin, we carried a preloaded red syringe that read, "Revivon, for animal use only." I had wanted to laugh when I first read it, but the CIA had assured me that Itorphin was the safest and quickest method of immobilization, and that this was an antidote that would work on humans as well. As I got to the window, seeing the cracked glass panes and ancient splintering wood, a sudden urge to turn away came over and I began sweating heavily. Chills ran up and down my body and I felt unreal, not in the moment. It felt like I had just woken up in the middle of a dream, but when I looked outside, I knew my mind could not have conjured such atrocities in the course of a nightmare. On a white, skeletal horse sat a red rider, his body twisted and dark, his features demonic and inhuman. The hooves softly clicked on the dirt and stones as the man rode over bodies, their faces frozen in horror. It seemed like I was looking at something not from the angles and geometry of our universe, as if space itself twisted around this horrendous being of power. Its massive head formed the shape of an upside-down triangle, its crimson skin as smooth as fresh paint. Two bulbous, glistening eyes stared out straight ahead unblinking. They looked like two spherical obsidian stones, as large as baseballs and seemingly without eyelids. They looked insectoid or even entirely alien. Like the eyes of a poisonous snake, they radiated malice and power. Underneath it had some strange exoskeleton, its bones on the outside of its body, grooved and smooth like a red shell rippling down its thin chest. Its legs jutted out the sides of the undead horse, like the legs of a praying mantis, sharp and muscular. The horse, despite having no flesh or muscle on its body, moved quickly. It had two pure black eyes like those of its master, though not nearly as strange. They didn't form a bulbous spherical mass like those of the riders, but looked like two black stones embedded into its skull, shining with oil spot rainbows and colors that glimmered off its eyes as they caught the sun. A North Korean man ran across the street, and the rider on the horse pointed a long, festering finger in his direction and uttered a single word. The man stopped immediately, his eyes widening, the blood draining from his face. He began to claw at his own eyes, ripping them and shredding them, until blood streamed from the sockets and two empty, lidless voids stared out. He began to choke and turn blue, as if he had swallowed his own tongue, and fell to the ground, seizing and kicking. I saw his fingernails and lips becoming cyanotic as he laid on the dirt, as limp as a rag doll. As if in response, the creature on the skeletal horse gave out a deafening demonic shriek. It echoed across the mountains, reverberating in eerie waves. The voice sounded like thousands of voices spliced together, some simultaneously fading out, while others rose in a harmonizing cacophony. It made a nightmarish sound, and goosebumps rose up on my skin as I listened to the cry of this creature, a cry as alien and inhuman as anything that I had ever heard. I realized Agent Hudson was no longer standing next to me. He had the red syringe in his hand, injecting some of the Revivon into Hee-Lin's neck. Her breathing seemed to slow, far too slow for comfort, and her face looked pale. But within seconds her breathing began to accelerate, and her eyes had started to flutter. With a confused and sleepy expression, she opened her eyes, seemingly not realizing where she was or how she got there. Agent Hudson looked up, motioning for me to come over. I looked out the window. I saw countless bodies on the road, men, women, and children all laying haphazardly next to one another. The creature had stopped its incessant, demonic screaming, but the echo still came back over the mountains, slowly dying down over a few seconds. My ears rang from the intensity of it, a high-pitched buzzing that made it hard to understand Agent Hudson's words. I listened intently, looking at his lips. "She knows something," he said, his eyes cold and slitted. "We need to find out what's going on here. I think it's something far worse than we imagined." I heard the distant clicking of the horse's hooves as it passed down the street, trampling the dozens of corpses on the way. "Oh no, I knew it," Hee-Jin said woozily, her head spasmodically moving from side to side, her eyes wide and full of terror. She looked up at the ceiling as she lay on her ancient bed. Agent Hudson looked at me. "Your Korean is far better than mine," he said. "She'll trust you more than me simply because you know the language and you look like her." I shrugged. "I'll give it a shot," I said. I pulled up a rickety chair, continuously glancing out the window, but the strange rider had passed by. He no longer screamed, and the silence outside seemed deathly. The smell of blood hung heavy in the air, coming through the cracks and broken windows of the dilapidated house. "Hee-Jin," I said, pulling up close to her. She moved her head on the pillow, meeting my eyes. They were wide and very dark, filled with nightmarish memories and terrors that I couldn't imagine. What happened during the arduous march? What caused the bodies to come back? "We don't know where it started, but it seemed to come from the forest north of here." I looked knowingly at Agent Hudson, who nodded. That was where the biological weapons facility we had been sent to investigate was located, directly north as the crow flies, not more than 3 or 4 miles from the town. "And what was it?" I asked. "The undead, but not just them. They followed something inhuman, something that rode by on a horse. I never saw it, but I had heard stories from survivors. They said that its horse shone a pale color made of bones with pure black eyes, like those of its master. The military told us that it was a monster sent by the Americans or the South Koreans, and that our great leader would respond in force by sending 1,000 monsters to their country for every one that invaded ours. But others whispered that it was made by the Democratic People's Republic itself, though they would never say it publicly for fear of execution. And how did it end? I asked. When the famine ended, the corpses and the rider went where? She shrugged. The Chinese sent reinforcements to the border regions, and the DPRK began to fill every town around here with soldiers. Most of the Korean soldiers were starving just like us, and they would take our food by force, whatever little we had. If anyone was caught hoarding more than a couple meals worth, they would be publicly executed. I spent that time foraging in the forest for herbs and mushrooms, and trying to capture small game, even eating rats and mice that I caught in traps. I avoided the town as much as I could after I saw the first of the dead rise to life. It seemed to last forever, but then one day the soldiers were gone, and food began to come back in slowly. We were given rice and then bread, and the arduous march came to an end, with millions of our comrades dead. It was so bad back then that you couldn't leave the bodies of your loved ones out. They had to be buried immediately after death. Otherwise, you would come back and find their bodies gone, or meat cut out from the legs and arms. Cannibalism ran rampant, and people ate grass and dirt just to fill their stomachs. But you are still eating grass, I pointed out. She smiled sadly. Only once a day now, she said, as if that made it acceptable. And in these conditions, maybe it was. I had immense respect for this old woman who had survived such hardships and starvation, and seen such horrors unleashed. How come none of this ever got out? I asked. No one in the rest of the world knows anything about the dead rising during the famine. We know that millions of people starved, but even finding out how many was impossible. What happens here, it stays here with our people. It is our burden alone. Living here is like living in a reinforced fortress, with no one allowed to leave or communicate with anyone outside. Anyone who tries to leave is shot on sight. The police make sure you know the consequences of trying to leave, or of communicating with the outside world. They say no one should want to leave, because we're the greatest society in the world, the most equal and the most feared. No one would attack us, and that's why I think maybe it came from our own people. I was about to respond when I heard the cracking of twigs and brush moving right outside of the house. Moving quietly to the window, I looked outside. The rider was gone, but now a horde of walking corpses streamed into the town. They had blood coming from their mouths, their nose, their eyes, streaming yellowish, viscous fluid out of gaping wounds that ran down their bodies. Deep gash marks, bullet wounds, or marks of torture shone out on their bodies, revealing bones and ligaments underneath. A horrific sight that sent waves of fear through my body. The smell that came with the wave felt like a solid wall of fetid rot, an odor so thick that I could taste it, and I nearly retched. Like rotten cheese, decomposing tomatoes, and rancid meat, that smell emanated out from the hundreds of corpses that gnashed their mouths, chewing the air constantly. Their bloody eyes stared like dolls' eyes, blank and lifeless in their sunken faces. Most looked starved, and many were totally naked, though on some, rotting fragments of cloth still clung to their pale, lifeless skin, threadbare and clotted with blood. Yellow pus and mucus shone and glistened on their bodies as they moved forward, hungry and fearless, an army that seemed to emanate from one large hive mind, coordinating their movements like birds in a flock. He Jin didn't see them, and in her partial opioid stupor, she may not have heard the subtle movements. They didn't scream or shriek unlike the rider, and they moved as silently as predators. Whatever few people still had life on the street began screaming again as their bodies were eaten alive, the corpses lunging forward at the human flesh on the street, falling upon it with powerful jaws. The screams were weak and panicked, the last calls of dying men and women as they came back to a nightmare, even worse than before. Those who died during the famine came back. Mobs of walking undead children who ate even their own parents and grandparents, though many were orphans by that point. The parents died too from starvation, and their bodies were often eaten by the townspeople. Many turned to cannibalism, and human meat was sold on the black market during the darkest of times. Women used to sell themselves just to get a bowl of rice or a piece of bread. People would eat their own children and mothers, and strangers or even friends were killed for whatever little food they had. The walking corpses turned their heads towards the house, like bloodhounds who just got a whiff of their prey. As she kept talking, they began to rise from these still bodies that they fed upon, converging upon the front door. A stream of rotting flesh and gaping mouths who now knew where we were. "Agent Hudson," I said in a trembling voice. "Time to go." He had seen it too, and we started sprinting towards the back door. Jin didn't rise and didn't seem to realize the danger. We had to save ourselves and also had a mission to accomplish, one that seemed far too important than ever now. I had a sick feeling in my stomach as I left her behind, condemning her to a horrible and slow death. Agent Hudson smashed through the rickety boards of the back door without even opening it, splintering the wood in an explosion of adrenaline. I followed through the hole. Jin began to scream in agony, and I quickly turned, seeing the frontmost corpses lunging forward and eating her from the legs and stomach. Her eyes rolled in pain and horror, shrieking like a banshee as blood gushed from the bites. The undead in the back of the streaming crowd stopped, looking at me while I stood in the door, an M67 fragmentation in my right hand, round and blue as a robin's egg. I pulled the pin, throwing it in an overhand arc that flew past in a blur and bounced off the floor of the kitchen, rolling into the bedroom across from me. As I turned and ran, I saw Jin's eyes, haunted, staring up at the ceiling as blood streamed from her stomach and legs. She moaned and whimpered constantly, no longer having the energy to scream. The creatures ripped the flesh off with their teeth, swallowing huge chunks of her body without chewing. It was a sickening sight, and even a few months later, recalling it makes me feel sick to my stomach. Agent Hudson had reached the edge of the woods, and I was now 30 feet behind him as I sprinted as fast as I could to give myself distance from the explosion that I knew was coming. I counted down in my head, 5, 4, 3, 2, but that was as far as I got. A flash of light exploded out of the house, sending splintered boards and pieces of drywall flying in all directions. I looked back and saw a red ball of fire catching the drywood of the house in an instant. My ears rang from the ground-shaking roar of the grenade. I started to look forward again, but I tripped on a rock and went flying. I landed on the grass, hitting my head hard against the dirt. It only stunned me for a few moments, but as I lay there, still too close to the house for any peace of mind, I heard a new sound coming from the house. The corpses had started to make noises, but they didn't scream. It sounded like a bloodthirsty crowd moaning in agreement as some fanatical leader whipped them into a frenzy, or the cheering of Roman spectators in a coliseum seeing men slice each other apart. It sounded like hundreds of people enraptured chanting their death rattle. And then as the fire spread and the house quickly started to collapse on itself, it faded into silence. As we passed through the woods, following a winding deer trail up and down the mountains, my thoughts kept turning back to Jin and what she had said. "What do you think about all this?" I asked him, and he looked over at me with an icy glance. "Our mission doesn't require us to think about any of this," he said. "We're just gathering information and reporting back. Thank God we came when we did. Hopefully it's still early enough in the process to undo some of the damage." "What process?" I asked. He hesitated for a long moment and then started talking, looking straight ahead and not making eye contact. "The North Koreans aren't the only ones to make this breakthrough. he said. Scientists in the US and Russia have also experimented with genetically engineered viruses or synthetic prions that can interact with dying tissue. At the expense of higher cognitive functioning, some of these viruses can keep the body alive or even bring it back from the dead. In our experiments, the test subjects always end up like the people here. Only the lower parts of the brain still function, those related to hunger and instinctual needs. They seem to feel no pain, and they have no memories or concept of self, as far as we can tell. But that's not the strangest part. When our scientists injected a group of recently deceased corpses, the group seemed to be able to communicate somehow, as if without words. Like birds in a flock, I asked, remembering my thoughts when I saw the silent river of bodies flowing into the town. He nodded grimly. Somewhat, but this is more complex. We understand flock movement, it's simple science. Each bird keeps a certain gap between itself and every other bird, and so any movement on the fringes causes the entire group to move, as if of one mind, but in reality, they're all just responded instinctually to the desire to put a predetermined space between themselves and the other birds nearby. All these individuals moving in this way causes a seemingly disparate group of animals to form one collective action, though this is in no way telepathic or unexplainable. But these undead, he shook his head slowly, walking forward with determined steps, his heavy boots crushing the earth underneath. It's something more, it isn't just instinct. It's like they can communicate without any external signal. I'll give you an example. We had 2 in barred prison cells in the same hall. Every meal, one of our men would come by and give them raw meat, which they would greedily eat as soon as it was thrown. But something went wrong. The 2 reanimated corpses couldn't possibly see each other and they never talk. Well, not in words anyway. Sometimes they make noises when they're dying or being attacked, like we heard back there. And it's always the same sounds. Never a scream or a cry of pain, but that strange and drawn out. Ah. Goofy, I know. I nodded. I've heard similar things before, I said. I remember listening to a speech about the final solution. As he advocated murder and extermination, the crowd began clapping and admitted that same ah. It was bloodthirsty, like a combination of bloodlust and adrenaline, of extreme pleasure and the promise of future death for the enemy. But why do they do it when they die? He shrugged. No one knows. Maybe we'll figure it out one day, but it's just one more unexplained part of their mob behavior. Anyways, one of the guards at the time was a good friend of mine. I had actually gotten him a job from the company. He was in the Rangers with me for a couple years. He was strong, smart, and had amazing reflexes. A true veteran of a soldier. And yet in the end, none of that helped him. The other guard was giving the meat to the undead. He broke the protocol by reaching through the bars and dropping it. The corpse was, so he said, across the room, but in a blur, it lunged at him and grabbed his hand. He began screaming as it bit his fingers off, holding his wrist in a death grip. My friend turned to look, standing next to the bars, and the other creature who had been prone in the corner and appeared totally blank, almost hibernating, suddenly appeared and reached through the bars. My friend had his back to the cage only for a second, while he turned around and looked at the source of the screaming. But it was enough. Zombie grabbed him by the shoulders, forcing him back into the bars with its superhuman strength. This man was a beast and he worked out every day, but he couldn't release himself from the grip of the smaller, emaciated, undead creature. Happened so quickly that no one even realized they were attacking until it was over. Undead man slammed my friend's head into the bars over and over, gripping him by the neck from behind. My friend lost consciousness so quickly, his body going limp, but the creature kept slamming the back of his skull into the metal until it had broke in multiple spots. He ended up going into a coma and dying a few days later without ever waking up. When the SWAT team came in to deal with the attack, they found the undead creature licking the blood and hair and bone fragments off the dirty metal bars. as blank and as quiet as ever. But that blankness is a front. It's all a lie. They're much smarter than you might think. We walked in silence for a while. I admired the beautiful mountain views. It seemed such a contrast to the horrors nearby. Few people who visited the area would ever believe that a biological weapons laboratory dealing in human experimentation was hid nearby. Moreover, we had been warned before we left that the North Koreans may have secret camps in the area to use prisoners as labor and keep the human guinea pigs close to the laboratory, so they could be slaughtered and experimented upon easily and at once. Seeing as the company had access to high-tech spy satellites that could see a dumpster from outer space, I figured this warning was a guarantee that we would see concentration camps as well. Finally, I saw a break in the trees. The sun had started to go down behind the mountains and a cool breeze began to blow through the area. The sweat on my forehead from hiking so far evaporated quickly, and I started to feel relief that we had actually reached our destination. Now we could finish this horrible task and go home. But a chill ran through my body as I peered through the trees at the building. From here I could see the metal door in the front of the complex stood wide open. Across the front wall, written in Korean and the same huge black writing as before, appeared only 3 words: "Come and see." We argued for a few minutes. I did not want to go in. "It's clearly a trap," I said. "Why is the door wide open? They know we're here and they want us to go in so that they can ambush us and capture us. It couldn't be more obvious." But Agent Hudson wasn't so sure. He thought that the words had nothing to do with us, and that the door may have been left open by fleeing people. "Our mission," he said, "is to go in and find out what's going on. We have no choice. If it's a trap, don't get taken alive. But with the amount of chaos in this area right now, we will never have a better chance than we do at this moment. We need to take it." I sighed. "Stay close behind me and cover our backs. Now let's go." By the time that we broke out of the woods, moving silently with guns raised, darkness had descended. The biological weapons laboratory still had electricity and bright lights shone from all around it. We first had to move through a razor wire fence on the outer perimeter of the complex. It had a guardhouse situated at the only gate. I noticed that this road was paved unlike all the others that I had seen, and it looked fairly new. The North Koreans apparently had plenty of money to spend on the military, but none to spend on their own people or residential infrastructure. I could see the entire complex much more clearly now. I passed by the guardhouse, close behind Agent Hudson, glancing inside as I went. I saw a dead man in there, his face eaten off. His skull gleamed white behind the red, like a macabre Christmas decoration. The complex itself looked massive. I couldn't see the end of it. Constructed of gray, smooth concrete with a flat roof and no windows. It came across as one of the most depressing and utilitarian architectures that I had ever beheld. It rose 4 stories in the air, but we knew from informants that it also descended another 5. What we wanted was down below, as the upper stories were mainly used for bureaucracy and paperwork. The actual experiments and pathogens were kept below, and the deeper one descended, the more virulent and dangerous the pathogens became. Between the fence and the complex, a field extended around the square building, the paved road winding its way through the neatly trimmed grass. Without hesitation, we sprinted through the open area. I kept checking our backs, but despite the feeling of eyes watching me, I saw no sign of anyone. Soon we were inside the complex. The breeze came in with us, but no longer did the smell of pure mountain air and forest surround us. A fetid odor, rotten and thick, permeated the entire complex. I looked down the hallway, seeing portraits of previous leaders as well as various propaganda posters, many of them showing nuclear missiles and ICBMs. "We will incinerate all our enemies in a sea of fire," one poster to my right exclaimed. A North Korean soldier's face painted in front of a soaring nuclear missile. a wall of fire and smoke in the background. Agent Hudson and I stopped to rest for a moment in this strange milieu of totalitarianism and nationalism. North Korea had always reminded me of a modern real world in 1984. "We have to go to the bottom floor," Agent Hudson said, breathing heavily. I nodded, already knowing that. He had a tendency to repeat information in tense situations. I always assumed it somehow relieved his anxiety, that crippling, heart-tightening feeling before a battle of a life or death situation. "Lead the way," I said, smiling at him, trying to relieve the tension. We found a stairway and began descending. The smell of rotting bodies grew worse, the air growing thicker as we descended. No longer did the sweet mountain breeze blow around us. I coughed, almost throwing up and bending double. Agent Hudson whipped around, putting his fingers to his lips and his eyes blazing. By the time that we got to the bottom floor, I was breathing through my mouth, my eyes watering. I wish that they had given us some gas masks or respirators. I couldn't imagine how anybody could work here, though I also couldn't imagine eating grass and rats on a daily basis. Agent Hudson silently pushed the door open, disappearing into the dark corridor with his rifle ready. I followed closely behind. I found a long, dimly lit hallway. Down here, there were no propaganda posters, no portraits of the great leader. It felt cold and blank. Concrete walls opened into rooms without doors. We moved into the first room, and I nearly vomited at what I saw. A man tied down to a stretcher and gagged. He had been dissected alive without anesthesia. He moved his head wildly, his gleaming eyes staring back at us in horror. I saw his entire chest and stomach open. I could see the thready, rapid heart beating in the open surgical wound. The ribs had been removed and placed neatly in a pile beside the man. Without hesitation, I stepped forward, raising my tranquilizer gun and shot him in the arm. It would be a fatal dose, a rapid cessation of breathing without any Revivon to counteract the lethal opioid, as the itorphin was nearly 100 times stronger than fentanyl. Turning around rapidly, we left the room, moving along this corridor of nightmares. In the next room, we found a woman's corpse, with massive bubonic sores all over her body. Viscous yellow fluid ran out of the wounds. They concentrated along the locations of her lymph nodes, with pustules the size of oranges swelling out of her neck and armpits. "That looks like the Black Death," Agent Hudson said. "Oh, we should probably get out of here. This isn't helping, and I don't want to be near that crap. Can't believe they don't even contain highly infectious biological agents in plexiglass or something here, like we do back in the States. These people probably make $1,000 a year," I reminded him. "This is one of the poorest countries imaginable. Heck, I'm surprised they can even keep a constant flow of electricity to this building." We kept moving, and to my surprise, the next room was in some den of horror. It was an office. It looked like the office of a doctor or a scientist, with posters of the human body covering the walls. In the corner, I saw a man cowering behind his desk, dressed in a white lab coat. He was skinny, with black framed glasses. I looked over his face, high cheekbones and small chin. It didn't look like the face of a devil. Agent Hudson and I stared in surprise at him for a fraction of a second. He used the opportunity to raise a pistol, and before I knew it, he had fired. "No!" I cried instinctively, raising my gun and shooting him in the chest. I turned to see Agent Hudson on the ground. I ran towards the scientist, who now laid on the floor, a puddle of blood spreading underneath his body and soaking into his white coat. I took the gun away from him and then ran back to Agent Hudson. I saw with immense relief that the bullet had hit him in his Kevlar body armor, directly above the navel. It would probably leave a deep and painful bruise, but it wouldn't kill him. He grunted, sweating now. "Dang, that hurts," he said through gritted teeth, breathing fast. I left him on the ground and went back to the scientist. He was still alive. The bullet appeared to have hit him in his left shoulder. It bled heavily, but it didn't appear to have torn any arteries or major blood vessels. I knelt down next to him, putting my gloved right hand on the wound and pressing down. He screamed in pain. "Yeah, it hurts, doesn't it?" I said. "So I want to play a game with you. If you give me the right answers, I'll let you live. And if I think you're lying to me, well..." I took one finger and reached into the wound, pressing hard against these shattered bone fragments, feeling the warm blood running down around my gloved finger. He nearly passed out, his face turning pale, but he came back to consciousness, shrieking and waving his arms. I took my finger out, flicking the blood off with a smile. "Okay, so what's your name?" "Dr. Lee," he said. "Okay, Lee. And what do you do here?" "I'm the head scientist for the research program here." "And are you the one responsible for all the walking corpses nearby?" I asked. He hesitated for a long moment. I sighed, bringing my fist back and punching him in the nose hard. I felt it crack under the blow, his head slamming back into the concrete floor. He began to plead and cry. "Please," he said, blood streaming out of his nose. "Don't hurt me anymore, I'll tell you." Agent Hudson had by this point gotten shakily to his feet and walked over towards us. He leaned heavily on the desk, looking down at Dr. Lee with hatred. "Yes, I was in charge of the resurrection virus. We had obtained a sample from Russia gathered by bribing one of the head scientists in the project, but I have no idea how it escaped from the lab. We had only given it to a few subjects here." "And those subjects are all still here?" I asked. He nodded, his face a bloody mess, his nose crooked and smashed. "What about the rider on the skeletal horse?" He looked at me in confusion, a genuine expression as far as I could tell. "The what?" he asked. "You don't know anything about some monster with bulging black eyes who rides around on a horse made of bones?" I asked. He looked at me like I was insane, and I figured that was answer enough. I looked at Agent Hudson. "What do you want to do with this one?" I asked. "We should in reality take him as hostage. He likely has a lot of vital information." Shaking his head, Agent Hudson pulled his pistol out of its holster. "There's too much danger in our escape route," he said, "and we aren't counting on zombies when we made them. So change of plans, no hostages." He aimed his pistol directly at the center of Dr. Lee's face. But we were so intent on our work that neither of us noticed the undead who had entered the room. Dr. Lee's eyes widened, but not at the sight of Agent Hudson's pistol. He looked behind him, beginning to whimper and plead. I spun around, seeing a small girl missing an arm. It looked surgically amputated at the soldier, and the wound still had a yellowish pus and watery blood leaking out. Her eyes, though, were not those of a little girl. They looked like glass eyes, as lifeless as a statue's. Though this mission took place a few months ago, those eyes still haunt me, and in my nightmares I still see them daily. With a vicious, rapid expression on her face, she sprinted forward, a blur of bloody skin and fluttering white hospital gown. Jumping onto Agent Hudson's back, she began to bite furiously at his neck. He spun around in circles, trying to throw her off and screaming for help. I ran forward, but another body tackled me from the side, throwing me over the desk. As my shoulder smashed into the wood, my rifle went flying out of my hands. I landed on the chair, crushing it beneath my body, feeling the wood splintering cut into my exposed skin. Rising quickly, I reached for my pistol, looking across the desk at the blank eyes of the man standing there, a bullet hole in the direct center of his chest. I saw marks of the Black Death on his body as well. Swollen lymph nodes turned black and purple, fluid-filled pustules the size of eggs rising on his skin. I shot him in the brain and he went down, kicking and writhing. Agent Hudson had by now thrown the girl off and whipped his pistol around, shooting her in the face. Blood streamed down his neck from deep cuts where large parts of the skin had been bitten off. "Oh, Jesus," he said, wincing. "That hurts." "We need bandages," I said. Dr. Lee sat up. "We have medical supplies in my desk," he said, pointing at the drawer. I quickly got out disinfectant and bandages. attending to Agent Hudson's wound. He breathed quickly but showed no signs of pain as I cleaned and wrapped it. "You're going to need my help to make it out of here," Dr. Lee said. "There's too many of those things. If you agree not to kill me, I'll help you, and I'll give you whatever information you need." As if on cue, I heard doors slamming from the floors above us, echoing down the stairway. More of them are rising, and the camp nearby has thousands of bodies. If you don't take my help, you'll be overwhelmed. There are secret passages nearby. We quickly agreed to take Dr. Lee with us. Grabbing a medical kit, we got him up. I recovered my rifle and pointed it at the back of his head. "Lead the way," I said as dozens of footsteps began descending the stairs. I was hesitant to take Dr. Lee with us at all. I knew if I had been captured, he wouldn't have hesitated for a millisecond to dissect me alive or use me as a guinea pig for some excruciating experiment. But he turned out to be more useful than I ever imagined. He sprinted down the long concrete hallway, leaving drops of blood from his streaming nose as he went. Agent Hudson and I followed him side by side, both of us checking our bags constantly. The footsteps grew louder and closer by the second, and at any moment, I expected to see dozens of hostiles streaming through the door. And Dr. Lee turned suddenly into a random side room on the right. It looked no different from the other biological laboratories, except this one had no research subject strapped to the cold table. Dried blood saturated the surface and the floor all around it. I thought to myself what a health code violation that was, and then I realized with some slight amusement that this country had probably never heard of a health code. The door slammed loudly open at the end of the hallway, but I heard no men shouting orders, and no dogs barking, and no sound of normal human interaction. A cold chill ran down my spine as the soft padding of sprinting footsteps came closer and closer to the room. Dr. Lee frantically ran to the corner, leaving small random drops of blood dripping down from his wounds. I wondered whether the undead could smell the blood, whether they would follow the scent directly to us in a matter of moments. Dr. Lee fumbled with a hatchway in the corner. He pulled it open with a loud shrieking of metal. The small metal door was covered in rust, and it looked like it hadn't been opened since the Korean War. The sound of the groaning metal echoed down the hallway. So much adrenaline rushed through my body at that moment. I felt as if I could see every sound wave passing through the air. Time seemed to slow down as the first twisting, limping silhouettes came across the threshold. Without thinking, I pushed Dr. Lee hard into the hatchway, hearing him fall down the tunnel. I had no idea how far down it was, and at this point I didn't care. I saw the open black mouths of the undead approaching me. At the front, I saw a little Korean boy no older than 7 or 8, limping forwards with a swollen body. It looked like he had died of starvation, his stomach bulging over his naked sticks of legs, one foot dragging behind him, crooked and swollen. Red streamed down his blank eyes from a deep slash in his skull. I could see the bone peeking out through the wound, like the moon shining out from behind the clouds. As lithe as a dancer, twisting their bodies in inhuman ways, some dragging shattered legs behind them, this mass of rotting humanity came at us. Agent Hudson went into the tunnel next, giving me a quick glance before he dropped down. I pulled out an M67 fragmentation grenade from my suit, yanking the pin out quickly and rolling the grenade across the room, and then I dropped down. The fall was longer than I expected, and I didn't brace myself at all for it, landing heavily on my right ankle. I felt a twist, an explosion of pain running up through my leg. Then the rest of my body fell forwards and I landed hard on Agent Hudson. He grunted. "Jesus," he began to say, and then the grenade went off. All I remember was thinking that the world was collapsing around me, that the sun had gone supernova and blown apart the entire planet, but within moments, as heavy clouds of earth and stone fell from the ceiling, I felt something smash into the back of my head. My vision went white for a moment, warm blood streaming down my back, and then I was gone. "Hey, can you hear me?" a voice asked from far away. I saw darkness, felt something sticky on my torso and head. I groaned, not moving or responding for a few seconds. "Can you stand?" My vision started to return. I remembered what had happened and then sat up quickly, causing a lightning bolt of pain to sear through my head. I gritted my teeth, pressing both hands against the side of my skull, as if I could keep the pain contained with simple pressure. "God dang," I whispered. "That really hurts." I saw Agent Hudson kneeling next to me in the dim light. Looking over, I saw Dr. Lee, sitting calmly next to me, his eyes revealing nothing. He might have been watching an infomercial on late-night TV for all the expression showing on his face. "Here," Agent Hudson said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a couple of tablets, pre-sealed in foil. "It's naproxen. Aleve. It ain't great, but it's the best we have. Unless you want to try some of the itorfen." I smiled wildly at his joke and then unwrapped both capsules. Agent Hudson held out a flask that he had pulled out of nowhere like a magic trick. He pressed the warm metal of it against my palm. "It's a little early to start drinking," I muttered, my head splitting into a horrible migraine. "Nah, it's Gatorade," he said. "I just used the flask because it's small and it's metal, so maybe, hey, it'll stop a bullet one day. Can you imagine this thin, pathetic thing saving someone's life?" I took a sip, handing it back to Agent Hudson. He didn't offer Dr. Lee any. In fact, he acted like the mad scientist didn't even exist. Groggily, I rose to my feet. Waves of nausea ran through my stomach and I grabbed my head again with my hands, massaging the scalp to try and help the migraine. I felt a deep gash on the back of my head and clotted sticky blood had dripped down beneath my camouflage uniform. I looked at Agent Hudson and Dr. Lee. They seemed mostly fine, though they had cuts and scrapes all over their bodies. A thin covering of dirt and dust had settled on their faces, even covering Dr. Lee's thick, black-framed glasses. He took them off and tried to clean them on the inside of his shirt. "Okay, Dr. Lee," Agent Hudson said in an icy tone, using his limited grasp of Korean to communicate. "This is your rodeo now. Lead the way." Dr. Lee did, rising quickly, his nose mashed to one side, his face covered in drying blood. He looked nothing at all like the professional clean doctor that we had found in the lab. "So, why were you hiding?" At first, Dr. Lee said nothing. He seemed to ignore the question. And then in a monotone voice, looking straight ahead down the dark and cramped tunnel, he answered, starting to walk forwards at a quick pace. We followed closely behind. "I haven't been entirely truthful with you," he said. "No kidding?" I asked, my voice seething with sarcasm. Agent Hudson gave me a nasty look and then he motioned for Dr. Lee to continue. "The last time this happened was during the arduous march. Someone released the resurrection virus then too. I don't know who or why. We'll probably never figure it out. But this time I think I know who did it, or at least I can narrow it down to a few people. There's a group within the weapons complex who wants to overthrow the leader by any means necessary. They hope to destabilize the country, leading to a revolution. These are the only people who I believe have the motive and opportunity. A few work on the same level of the building as me, dealing with level 4 and 5 bioweapons agents. They've tried recruiting me on multiple occasions. I refused out of concern for my own life, but neither did I report them. They have connections allegedly all the way up to the leader's own sister, who was sending out feelers for what would happen if she had her brother killed and took the position upon herself. From what I know, she ultimately decided not to pursue that possibility at the moment. However, if an epidemic started in the country and led to millions of deaths, if people started dying in gruesome ways and rising from the dead, this could shock the people into action. Government has its own kind of inertia in a way. It takes another powerful force to interrupt its forward march into the future. But any force that can make the population rise up is sufficient to lead to the destruction of the state. The dirt tunnel started to turn sharply to the right, and at the end, I could see dim light coming in. As we got closer, I looked up, seeing an opening with a rickety ladder that let the moonlight stream in. "That hatch shouldn't be open," Dr. Lee said, frowning. He began to climb up the ladder rapidly. Agent Hudson followed quickly behind him, his pistol in one hand. He had it aimed at Dr. Lee in case he tried to run or trick us in some way. For all we knew, he could have assassins or snipers waiting for us to emerge from the hatchway above our heads, but I heard no movement. I followed up the ladder behind Agent Hudson, gripping my pistol in one hand as I slung the rifle over my back. I wanted to be able to fire at the first moment if necessary. Cold fingers seemed to tickle my back, goosebumps rising all over my skin. I knew something major was close and I didn't want to reach that cataclysmic moment. I felt like a sleepwalker striding blithely over the edge of a cliff. But even though I could see it coming, I felt unable to change my fate in any way. What I saw when I crossed over the last rung and entered into the dark world above stopped my breath. Hundreds of North Korean soldiers' corpses littered the field that we found ourselves on. Most of their bodies burnt beyond recognition. Most still had their mouths open in silent screams, their blackened skin cracked and broken from the immense heat. Their uniforms had been burned off, or in some cases, fused into their melted skin. "What happened here?" I asked, a note of horror in my voice. Neither Agent Hudson nor Dr. Lee answered. They looked around with wide eyes, and as if in answer to my question, I heard the shrieking of the rider from the edge of the woods nearby. He came galloping towards us in a blur, his skeletal horse shining white under the light of the moon. The hooves of the beast crushed the burnt bodies underfoot as it ran, the bulging black eyes of the rider staring straight through us, unblinking. His mouth hung open, showing a huge void. The air around it seemed to ripple as the eerie, ear-splitting scream emanated from his alien body, rising and falling in waves, echoing through the trees and spreading over the mountains. At that moment, I could barely hear orders being shouted in Korean, and reinforcements began to arrive, rushing through the trees that surrounded us and emerging into the field. They barely looked at us, focusing all their attention on the rider and his horse. They began to fire rapidly, and I pulled Agent Hudson and Dr. Lee towards an opening that I saw in the human wave attack. Bullets whizzed overhead and past my ears, all aimed at the shrieking rider. One North Korean soldier ran past the others, throwing a grenade at the monster. The creature went quiet all at once, as if shocked at this brazen move. The horse rode right over the grenade, and a second later it exploded. Agent Hudson, Dr. Lee, and I reached the edge of the woods by this point, and I tackled Dr. Lee, instinctively pushing him and myself down. Next to us, Agent Hudson lunged, covering his head with his hands. Shrapnel and splinters of wood flew past us, a pillar of red flame rising up in the center of the field, obliterating the burnt corpses that littered the ground like leaves in an autumn forest. But when I looked back into the field, I saw the rider still approaching, totally unharmed by the bullets and the explosion. He jumped off his horse as the soldiers closed in around him, hovering in the air a few inches above the ground. He began to spin around, shrieking his inhuman cry again, and white light poured from his body as thin as a razor. 4 streams of blinding energy shot out of his chest as he levitated in the air, rotating slowly in circles. The streams of deadly light hit the bodies of the soldiers that ran forward around him, firing their guns and yelling orders. As soon as the pulsating currents of light hit them, they immediately went quiet, their eyes widening, their mouths open. After it had passed, their bodies would slide apart, cut in half of the chest as if by a laser. In horror, I saw the flesh of their bodies begin to burn and melt, ripping apart as the light cut through the skin. Within seconds, every person standing in the field was dead, their destroyed bodies falling on those of their comrades underneath. The screams of the rider faded away as he lowered himself back to the ground, his sharp legs digging through the corpses of men underfoot and into the dirt beneath. From the opposite side of the field, I saw fresh reinforcements streaming in, some nearly tripping on the thousands of bodies that now littered nearly every square inch of the field, sometimes 2 or 3 deep. But the rider paid them no heed, walking back over to his horse and mounting it with an alien grace. He started to ride towards us, the North Korean soldiers yelling orders at him and opening fire. However, it ended as quickly as it had started, when thousands of undead began to rush in from the surrounding forests, the mass of rotting flesh overtaking them like a stream rolling over a pebble. "Go!" I whisper-screamed at Dr. Lee and Agent Hudson. Dr. Lee was directly in front of me, and I put my pistol directly into the back of his head. "And if you try anything, I swear to God, I'll blow your brains out before you even know what hit you. I'm not in the mood to be messed with, you got it?" He nodded, his eyes gleaming under his thick glasses. He turned away from me and started going at a jog, staying close behind Agent Hudson. Once we had given some distance between ourselves and the field, I turned, seeing no sign of the rider. Agent Hudson pulled out his electronic compass, sighing when he saw the coordinates. He pulled out a satellite phone from his pocket and dialed a long string of digits. After a few seconds, he said, "We're about 15 minutes out from the extraction point. 1 in tow. Level 5 situation is in progress near the border. We need immediate backup." Without waiting for a response, he hit the end button and shoved it back into his pocket. He looked back at Dr. Lee with pure and utter hatred. "You know," he said as we began jogging through the woods, going up and down mountain trails and around huge rocks and ancient trees. "My grandfather was in the Korean War, Ray Hudson. He was captured and tortured by scumbags like this guy." He pointed a trembling finger at Dr. Lee. Agent Hudson did not look good. Even under the dim light of the moon and stars, I could see his neck wound had turned a sickly purplish color. He pulled out his pistol and put it to Dr. Lee's head, still shaking with anger, or maybe something else. "I'll kill you right now, I swear to God. Give me one reason not to. I'll scatter your brains all over the place. You understand me?" Dr. Lee nodded, his eyes wide with terror. "Agent Hudson," I said sharply, "what in God's name are you doing? Lower your weapon, this hostage is valuable." But he kept shaking, his finger tightening on the trigger. I braced myself for the shot, for the back of Dr. Lee's head to dissolve in a spatter of blood and bone fragments. But at the last moment, Agent Hudson holstered his pistol. He slung his rifle back around and motioned with it for us to keep going. I wondered what I had just seen. He seemed like he was losing control in some pivotal way, but he was also my superior. This was only my first mission, and who was I to tell an experienced agent how to do his job? But it still felt wrong. Finally, we saw the watchtowers in the distance, poking up above the trees as they went in a line all the way up and down the looming mountains. From here, I could see for miles. In the Chinese direction, I saw countless lights from cars, houses, and businesses. But when I looked over to the North Korean side, I saw only darkness stretching for as far as the eye could see. "And just up here," Agent Hudson said, pointing to the other side of the guard tower. I saw barbed wire stretching across our path, tightened around the trees and pulled taut to mark the border. I could easily cut it with the clippers on my belt. But as I walked up to it, checking to my left and right, a swarm of activity started behind us. Leaves rustled and twigs cracked as many feet trampled the ground. Through the trees, I saw dozens of North Korean soldiers emerge, pointing their guns at us and shouting orders. Dr. Lee put his hand straight up in the air. "Please, these men kidnapped me," he screamed. "I think they're agents of the Imperial American government. Help me." I saw my life flash before my eyes. I didn't know whether to put my hands up or to go out fighting. Turning, I saw Agent Hudson put his hands up, his rifle falling limply from the strap around his neck. He winked at me. Following his lead, I dropped my rifle and put my hands up as well. The North Korean men running forward in their brownish-gray uniforms pulled out handcuffs to arrest us. And then sniper fire rang all around us. I ducked to the ground, covering my head as the face of the nearest soldier exploded. The others quickly followed, their chests and heads disintegrating under the impact of the hail of bullets. And soon it was silent again. I took my hands off my head, raising it slowly, seeing the still bodies of all the soldiers laying sprawled on the dirt. I looked across the border and saw Agent Stryker walking forwards in his immaculately pressed black suit, surrounded by a team of men in camouflage. They snipped through the barbed wire in seconds and approached us. Nearby, I heard helicopters descending. I looked over and saw Dr. Lee still alive, looking shell-shocked and confused. Agent Stryker told him in Korean to put his hands behind his back, and they handcuffed him there on the spot, pushing him towards one of the helicopters. Agent Hudson and I followed wordlessly behind, crossing over the border. I saw men climbing down from the trees in ghillie suits, sniper rifles slung around their necks. Wordlessly, we began to enter the black helicopters that landed. Agent Stryker sat in the one that we entered, waiting. As soon as we sat down, he congratulated us on a mission well done, and especially on capturing Dr. Lee, who would provide invaluable information to his interrogators. I just felt grateful to be alive after the horrors that I had seen. But as we got evacuated from that place, I looked over at Agent Hudson and saw his eyes